Men are the demand and women are the supply. This is because the male sex drive is far stronger than the female drive. Women therefore set the price in the market, and men Hey guys, so I finally read through the entire over 100 pages of this guy's, I don't even know if I want to say the M word, but you know. And it was quite remarkable, actually. I'm going to be careful on what I talk about specifically with it. And I noticed somebody, Dr. Winkles here, said, I'm surprised you didn't cover this when it first came out. It's still cool. Well, look, I'm Canadian. I think you can imagine why I would be concerned about covering it right when it happened, right? Given what happened and given the scrutiny that this community is traditionally under. So, but it is interesting, and actually it's funny. There's a guy who, I guess, if you've been in these sort of inky spheres, you've probably, like mostly Discord spheres, you've encountered him. He's a guy that goes by B as his moniker, and he is really into the like racial biospirit stuff. And I'm very skeptical of this stuff, but when I was reading this manifesto, I just said it now, whatever, I couldn't help but feel like not only did I understand what he was saying, and I'm going to, by the way, he was wrong in multiple critical areas, and I'm going to go into them, but he also made some important connections that as I discussed when this first happened, fit into a lot of the criticisms and ideas that I've had, which to the point where you wonder if he was looking at anything I produced. I don't think he was, now that I've read the whole thing. But it is interesting. And I couldn't help but feel like not only did I understand what he was saying, but I understood how he arrived at the conclusions he arrived at. Because like he's an Anglo Leaf, and he thinks in the same style and pattern than I do. And so I could actually, I could almost predict the lines upon which he was going to be following, like the ideas that he had. And some of them are kind of kooky, some of them are a little megalomaniacal, and some of them are pretty remarkable. So let's go into the first little bit here. So, your inability to completely code switch into algo speak is a good sign you still think normally. Yeah, I don't know, but it's probably just an age thing. But I will also talk, there are a few things that I was able to identify about him, and I haven't looked into anything about this guy in terms of his background and his family life, whatever. But I was able to infer several things about him based on his writings. The first thing I was able to infer is that he was profoundly socially isolated. And I don't even mean like socially isolated the way that most Zoomers are, most Zoomer guys are. I mean socially isolated to the extent that he it seems like he wasn't interacting with anybody, because the ideas that he developed were very elaborate, but you could tell that he had never bounced these ideas off of anyone else, and he also ignored critical things that if you were a white Canadian of his age, he was 25, growing up in this environment, this would be primarily on your mind. It would not be an afterthought. This would be something that you would be intensely focused on, particularly immigration and the racial conflicts between groups and how this manifests politically. He does not talk about that. He's very strictly about man versus woman. And another thing that was interesting is that he was very heavily drawn towards Marxism. And I actually looked into, and this was a video that got shut down on my channel. I guess it got struck for hate speech or something. I did a video where I talked about, like, I compared the situation for men, like top tier men, women, and then excess men. I compared them to the traditional Marxist concept of the class hierarchy, right? So you have like the bourgeois, you have the proletariat, you have the capitalist class, and I mapped them onto the different social relations. And I wasn't really fleshing anything too intellectual out, but I was sort of making an observation that Marxist class concepts map much more closely onto sex than they do onto economics. And it's just really, to me, it kind of tells me that I'm either equally insane as this guy, or I'm thinking like my pattern detection is on par, because if he arrived at similar conclusions that I did on this particular area, despite having no association with me whatsoever and not swimming in any of the circles I'm in, it must mean that I'm onto something intellectually. Is the full text available online? It was sent to me. I am not going to be uploading it. There are people that you could talk to, I'm sure, if you're on Discord, that could give you some ideas on where to get that. Just given that this incident occurred in my country, and that we now have some really draconian censorship and spying bills that got passed recently, I'm very cagey about that. As a matter of fact, I was cagey about even doing anything on the writings of this guy to begin with, because of how obsessive the Canadian state is in spying on and potentially arresting, I guess, what they would perceive as dissidents. Even though I'm not even advocating anything revolutionary, I'm advocating, if anything, like it's not revolutionary activity is just not going to work. That's typically what I'm advocating. I'm sort of advocating the opposite of this guy. Anyways, though, I'll start reading. I took notes as I was going through, and I copy-pasted paragraphs that I thought were relevant on different pages to talk about, because there's a lot of fluff that's either stuff that we all know, like looks matter more than personality, it's sort of shit, and other stuff that's just run on. Like he's very pedantic. He drones on a lot, which I can understand if he's trying to write something that presumably anybody who has no idea of anything could pick it up and read it. But anyways, so I broke it down into some key areas that I'm going to discuss. So on page 7 and 8, he talks about, he compares hunter-gatherer societies to agriculturalist societies. And this is a very common thing. I've seen a lot of our peers, and also just bioscientists, enthusiasts in general. Bioscience enthusiasts, are genetic genealogy enthusiasts, or archaeogenetic enthusiasts. They get really into this, where there was this period of time where there was all these male lineages that got clipped, basically, that got bottlenecked into a very tiny percentage of them. And then after this point, there was a period of monogamy, but before this point, it was like extremely polygynous. And I think some of the claims you hear is like one man reproduced for every 17 women, or something along those lines. Like you get some pretty extreme numbers, and there is some truth to it, but it's very much misunderstood. I don't think deliberately. I just don't think people have looked into the actual archaeology. so they're just going by the surface level of what they've read. But for example, here I'll just read the stuff that he wrote. So he wrote, in previous times, before monogamy had been instituted, and this is on page 7, this large class of males, and he's talking about excess males, was usually subjected to an existence full of harshness and brutality. Their short lives were comprised largely of serving small communities which did not benefit them very much, or more specifically, they were serving the females who themselves were all only breeding with a few of the males, evidently those males that were the most strong and attractive, and held leading roles in the primitive hunter-gatherer societies. The state of things remained for a long time, to the point where it is even the case that while most of the female humans who lived in the past were indeed able to reproduce, most male humans that lived in the past actually never ended up reproducing at all, and most of them lived in those primitive days and found themselves I cut that off. I must have made a mistake when I was copy pasting. But this is what I was talking about. He's saying hunter-gatherer societies were hyper polygynous, and it was all due to the women voluntarily breeding with like just a tiny percentage of the men. It's actually the other way around. Hunter-gatherer societies, they were not monogamous for the most part. Like monogamy as a concept didn't really come into existence anywhere except for Europe after the Neolithic period, for the most part. So this was something that arrived much later. But they did have societies where access to women was generally, and by the way, I'm resisting mentioning Brazil here because this is something else that that author of the book I was reading on Brazil talked about concerning the native tribes that inhabited Brazil when the Portuguese discovered it, where these primitive societies, they were not hypergamous or polygynous, but they were not monogamous either. They were just sort of like communal. Like you'd encounter, for example, Europeans in Africa when they would travel through Africa at various times, and they would encounter tribes. There would be various points where African tribal leaders would offer their own wives to sleep with the Europeans as like a token of hospitality, and that shouldn't be taken as them being cucks, because, well, I mean, technically they, in a sense, they were, but that's not how they perceived it, because the way that these societies functioned is because men were doing most of the hunting. Men were subject to the vast majority of mortality, and also hunter-gatherer tribes were not peaceful by any stretch. They were extremely warlike and violent. They were constantly at war with each other. Which, again, like if you look at any colonization of the Americas, one of the key elements was you ally with the first tribe that you meet, and then you provide them with weapons, and they sick themselves on the surrounding tribes and conquer them, and then they enslave a bunch of people, mostly women, and you then get access to their women as a reward, effectively. Like there was this one guy, John Robert Dunn, who did a lot of work for the Zulu king in southern Africa in the 19th century, and he got rewarded for helping the Zulu king in his wars against the other tribes in Africa. And this was an English guy, by the way. Well, he was Scottish, John Robert Dunn. And he was rewarded with, I think it was 73 Zulu wives by Shaka Zulu. And there's an entire village in South Africa descended from him. And that was just the way that these societies worked. Women were pretty much in abundance because of the shortage of men due to the endemic violence and also the violence that comes with hunter-gatherer societies. So, yeah, that's the first elucidation. He's wrong about this because he's misreading the time periods, because he's looking at the Neolithic. That's when male lineages expanded dramatically. Like certain male lineages expanded at the expense of others is during the Neolithic. I'll read the second paragraph here. Eventually, the widespread hunter-gatherer lifestyle began to be replaced in certain areas by agricultural lifestyles. In regions where this occurred, there appeared the earliest formations of human civilization, and therein the initial institution of monogamy as a societal practice. Within the monogamous agricultural city-states of the earliest civilizations, which were often quite communal, these men could instead spend their lives in relative peace, engaging in agricultural work, developing civilization further, and living with their wives. 100% wrong about this. He has it completely ass backwards. with the rise of farming, with the rise of Neolithic society, that's the origin of the exaggerated polygyny that we saw in the earliest ancient world, where you would have the king that had thousands of wives and concubines, and the elite would have as many wives as they could afford. When you have agriculture, you are not tied down to a specific fixed area when you're a hunter-gatherer. But when you have agriculture, you are locked down to a given area, and because of the productivity of farmland, this creates inequality in the society where one man and his descendants can accumulate vast amounts of property relative to other men. And you don't need a vast agricultural workforce to farm productive lands, especially in places like Iraq or in India, Egypt, where the soil was extremely fertile. So you ended up with very wealthy men who became the elite through control of the farmlands, and they would then employ the agricultural laborers. And those men who were the owners of the land, they would acquire all these women through their material wealth. In hunter-gatherer societies, that was not possible. Like, yes, in theory, the strongest hunter of the tribe might have maybe twice as many women at his disposal than the average member of the tribe. But because of the nature of hunter-gatherer societies and how they were constantly in war with each other, you could not have a society where a large segment of the male population was alienated. You couldn't do it, because you needed every fighting age man, able-bodied man, fighting against the enemy tribes. Whereas with agricultural societies, they supported these huge populations compared to the hunter-gatherers. And most men, or at least not the majority of men, had to engage in agriculture to feed the rest of the population. You could support specialization, as they say. This is what civilization, as we understand it, is. Like, where you have literacy, where you have merchants, where you have the building of the first cities. That's due to the specialization that was enabled by a certain percentage of the population getting freed from having to support themselves with subsistence farming. Like, that's where these ancient societies came from. And all of them, without exception, were polygynous. Ancient Sumeria, polygynous. Ancient India, polygynous. Ancient China, polygynous. Ancient Egypt, polygynous. The only time where you see an exception here is with the rise of the Indo-Europeans, and that's because it's not because of something magical or special about them. It's because of the lifestyle they led. It did not allow for the acquisition of large amounts of private property in a fixed location, because they were nomadic pastoralists. So they were in control of flocks on the wide open steppe. In some ways, it was similar to hunter-gatherers, where they had to have every fighting age man of the tribe engaged in protecting the flock, fighting for grazing lands with other nomadic pastoralist tribes, and expanding through the control of the best pastures and the increase of the flock. Like, it's a completely different lifestyle. And what that would force the Indo-Europeans, generally, obviously it wasn't a hard rule, but generally they would have a more equitable access to women for the typical man, because the typical man needed to be relied on to defend the tribe. Your strength of your nomadic tribe was your manpower. It was not your ability to produce food from the ground. That's the major difference. Okay, and this seems kind of pedantic to get into, but this is really critical, because he's basing all of his ideas after this point on this foundation. And as a result, it's kind of like, if you guys remember, if you guys remember your math classes in high school, where you're doing like the first differential equations, and you make a mistake at the very beginning that's a really minor mistake. Maybe you just forget to you switch a plus sign to a negative sign or something like that, and the rest of your logic is flawless, but the number that you come out with is completely way off base, and that's because you made a mistake at the very beginning. Even if it's a very minor mistake, that mistake completely throws off every other calculation you did, even if those calculations are otherwise excellent. And so in this case, this is an example of what I'm talking about. This is one of the key areas where he is wrong. And this is also why it's critical to interact with other people and don't be socially isolated, even if you're very intelligent. This guy's very smart, remarkably smart, but because he was socially isolated, he wasn't able to get feedback on his beliefs. You know, like I really wish I could have interacted with this guy, because it's an incredible waste of somebody who is clearly very passionate about his beliefs and very intelligent. And look at how it's ended up for him. Like it's a complete waste. Like he's wasted his life pointlessly, right? I mean, he took out a police officer. He didn't take out the I think it was the Pornhub CEO or something he was aiming for. He didn't achieve that. You know, for the most part, he's been forgotten about, right? Which is why I'm talking about him now, because you know, when this thing was first going on, I was a lot more worried about what the potential witch hunt could be. But it looks like they've largely forgotten about it. You know, thank you to Iran for occupying the headlines again. Anyways, I'll just continue on this. So, page 14 here, he talks about, and this is where I agree with him, and he arrived at this conclusion. It's almost like he watched my video on it, my video on politics. It says, liberalism and capitalism operate under the assumptions that all humans are basically good and that they desire to engage in competition. The bourgeois class needs people to think that humans are basically good in order for people to accept unquestioningly the absurd freedom that has been obtained by the bourgeois class, especially in economic matters. And then finally, liberalism and capitalism operate under the assumption that all humans are rational-minded and fully autonomous, and are thereby fully capable of obtaining a life of contentment merely by wanting to live such a life greatly enough. So he's saying effectively what I was talking about in my video on politics. Like this is the foundational flaw of liberalism. He's 100% right about it. But which is why I find it strange that he arrived at a Marxist conclusion. Because Marxism is basically, like, they assume the same things as liberalism does. Like, if you look at orthodox Marxism, it starts from an individualist point of view. I won't really get into that because it's kind of boring, but anyways, it's just funny. This is a great example of where he lined up with me in terms of his foundational assumptions, where he's starting from. Let me just read the comments here. Hunter-gatherer cucks. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the thing is, with hunter-gatherer societies and more primitive societies, they had such an excess of women that they just didn't they didn't have a sense of jealousy or possessiveness towards women because they had such an excess of them. And so they could just sort of pawn them off. Like, if you look at how West African societies operated, the women pretty much did all the manual work. Like, they would work in the farms. They were almost like beasts of burden. And then, you know, if you needed to make use of them, they were there. But otherwise, they were just used to do the work while the men were politicking together, as I've seen some writers say. And that's not a slight on West Africans. That's how a lot of ancient societies worked. I think even Germany, the traditional German Neolithic, like pre-Christian society, was kind of like that too, where the men were doing hunting, gathering, and war, and the women were pretty much doing the agricultural work. It seems to be just a characteristic of those kind of societies. Surprised he was Marxist, as those type of people like to clown on the manosphere. Online Marxists like to call Gen Z men mini Hitlers. Well, I think one of the factors here is I could sense that he was engaging with a lot of the tanky tier Marxist stuff, which is more Stalinist oriented. And if you actually have any interaction with those guys, this is like the Haz al-Din and the who's the white guy who Jackson Hinkle, I think his name is. Those guys. Jackson Hinkle is pretty much just the he's like the poster boy. The guy's an idiot. Haz al-Din's the actual brains behind it. But they're effectively, like, they are functionally believers in the alt-right in terms of their assumptions about the world, but they are not white. So, and I can respect that. Instead of just cucking out and being a self-hating ethnic, they've adopted this less white Eurocentric system, which still talks about like capitalism, woke capitalism, that sort of thing, liberalism, but from a position that is not ethnically or racially bound, or even culturally bound. So I think that's where he was drawing his influence from. I don't know if he actually read those guys, or if he just was reading communist literature and arrived at those conclusions himself. It's hard to say. Like, he doesn't reference anyone other than I'll get into this. He doesn't reference anyone other than like actual books that are written by Marxist-Leninists and Maoists. And then also he cites Reddit. I remember when I first came across him citing Reddit, I was just thinking, oh fuck. Oh no. It's like, this is like a rookie mistake these Zoomers make, is taking Reddit seriously. And what have you got here, Gayophile? Mercer, talk about the MTF who went ER in Connecticut and how he was an inky before transitioning and is meant. I have no idea who that is. If you're in my Discord server, you could send a link about it. That's the first time I've heard about it. I would probably be very careful about approaching that, because if he actually had some major casualties, that could be a little more dangerous. But I could look into it. And what video was removed about the high tier moids, voids, and low tier moids? It was a video on, I think it was something along the lines of what Dabney got wrong, or like what Dabney didn't predict, or something like that. That's, I don't recall the exact name because it got struck down and then I just deleted it. But I have a copy of the video, actually, like the original copy of the video. So maybe I'll upload it on Rumble or something. But anyways, I'll read a little bit further here. So on page 16, he writes, and this is another area where he's dead on the money. And it's funny because I have a window into this because my father was born in 1941. And so he was a teenager in the 1950s. And he told me stories about what things were like when he was a teenager. It was nothing like what the idealists would describe. Anyways, though, I'll just read this. The 50s, though so commonly idealized by conservatives today, was in actuality a time of rampant substance abuse, infidelities, and general degeneracy in the West as compared with previous times. It was in that decade that the rapid growth and proliferation of a new degenerative capitalist monoculture occurred. This monoculture was the direct predecessor of the one which still dominates excessively in the Western world today, and still finds itself spreading to new corners of the earth. It was and is characterized by the spread of unhealthy and commodified food, the propagation of increasingly vulgar and degenerate commercialized music, and the replacement of more gentle, traditional, and localized cultural practices with new commodified practices based heavily on the inordinate idolization of so-called celebrities. He's dead on the money here. I think I touched on that in my video on economics. I don't know if I fleshed it out as much, where I talk about how when we reached the limits to growth in terms of traditional areas of growth, like automotive, infrastructure, manufactured goods, like you can only have so many fridges, you can only have so many cars, you can only take so many vacations in the year. Like eventually we reached the limits of consumption for the average person, and then we had to start expanding monetization into other areas in order to keep up economic growth, because capitalism requires perpetual growth. Perpetual growth is necessary because as soon as perpetual growth is no longer possible, the capitalist class, out of its own self-interest, is going to pull its investments out of the market and put it into something safer. It's not going to risk anything in the markets, and that collapses the stock market, that collapses the financial and economic system. There's always a perpetual amount of growth that's required. And One of the ways to find that growth is you expand into, for example, like you take elements of society that were outside of monetization and commodification, and you commodify them, and you subject them to market forces. So, for example, in a traditional society where you have some kind of, because, there's a difference between arranged marriage as it was practiced in India versus arranged marriage in, or like how marriages were arranged in 19th century Europe, where it wasn't like you had two families negotiating and forming a marriage contract between their children, but it was more like you had to get the permission of the father of the woman you want to marry, and there was a formal or semi-formal method of pursuing a woman for marriage. Like my I think it was my great-great-grandfather. No, it was my great-grandfather. My mother has the diaries of my great-grandmother, and she talks about how my great-grandfather would pursue her for marriage and was like outside of her window, serenading her, sending her flowers, doing all these things that we would associate with sexual harassment now in current year, if you're a sub-6 man. This is sort of the process of wooing, and then after several months she gave in and married him. Like that was the way it worked in the traditional society of, this would have been Protestant Anglo-Scottish Canada at the time, like semi-rural Protestant Anglo-Scottish Canada of the 1920s, 1910s. And that is a system that produces really good outcomes for families, but it's also not monetized in any way, other than, I suppose, buying things for the wooing period. But once you marry, once that marriage contract is sealed, then the resource investment goes towards the children instead of going towards trying to find a mate. This is an area where monetization is extremely lucrative, and you can externalize the loss of forming a stable relationship by introducing liberal sexual values, introducing sexual freedom, the ability to end relationships and marriages at will and break them up and then pursue new relationships. And then you go through that process of wooing all over again, spending money on dates, spending money on things. Dating apps, obviously, huge source of monetization. Nightclubs, bars. I mean, Zoomers, at this point, we've reached a point where that's been, like, the monetization has shifted to OnlyFans and other, like, commodified forms of pornography, right? But at the time, it was like the bars and the clubs. Whereas in previous eras, you would meet in a community center, you would meet in a church. Let's say you go to church and you meet the girl, you'd meet her and her family when they were going to church. And so, yeah, that's one of the ways you break open this. You break open that sector of society for market forces. And then you break open, like, once you liberate women from the home and you introduce her into the workforce, now you don't have somebody performing unpaid labor, as it were, or socialized labor, as it were, in the household, doing household work, preparing food, preparing meals. And then you can introduce the market into that environment, because now people have to buy their own meals. I do meal prep every week, and it takes a huge percentage of my time. If I wasn't so aggressively trying to save money, I would just be buying my food pre-made as a single man. So he's 100% right about all this. That sort of degenerate radical liberalism, dragging everything to the bottom, this is exactly what will happen when you just allow market forces to do their thing and you don't have any guardrails. He's 100% right about that. And he says on page 18, it is during these times that divorce rates in Western nations first started to skyrocket, while birth rates plummeted accordingly, and both of these phenomena were the direct result of economic autonomy that the female had gained. The simple reason that they largely preferred to be hypergamous while working for corporations, as opposed to being monogamous while working for a husband. because it is because the path of corporate concubinage was more in accordance with their biological imperative. See, so this is where, like, I skipped for the most part because this is stuff we all know. I skipped his discussion of hypergamy versus polygyny, the 80-20 stuff, because obviously I have my own interpretation. And again, if he had interacted with me, perhaps he would have had a different perspective on this, because he goes into how the genetically elite men or the genetically gifted men have these amazing lives, but they're also terrible people that screw around with most of the women. That's not what the data shows. That's not what we observe in real life, really. Like, you don't see a lot of polygynous harems with chads. I mean, you kind of see it in the black community with black women and Tyrones. That is something that you do see. But I would say with whites, it's not really a thing. It's, for the most part, I've argued that it's due to the imbalance in singles, due to the population pyramid structure. I think that explains a lot more. It produces similar outcomes for the men that are excluded from this. But you don't need to rely on trying to explain women's behavior, men's behavior, using these sort of harem theories that just can't be proven and that don't show up in the data, right? And this is one of the fatal flaws that you see whenever one of our guys argues with one of the other side. They'll bring up stats that show that women are self-reporting snuggle rates that are far lower than what they should be if there was an imbalance. Like, if it was all the women sleeping with a few men, the rates of sexual frequency should be different from when they are. But we actually see women have an increased rate of sexlessness, but it's not as high, whereas men have a much higher increase. And if you look at self-reported pairings, women are much more likely to be in a relationship than men. Look, I'm not going to get into it. I've gotten into it several times, and it gets kind of autistic. You guys know my theory on population pyramids, why I think it's mostly, like, women genuinely are mostly in committed relationships, but there's just an excess of men. Anyways, I'll keep going into it. And by the way, this is another thing where he gets something else wrong about, this is more speculative on my part. But he gets something, in my belief, wrong here that he also builds his worldview on top of that runs into problems because of this. And do you trust women when they talk about snuggle frequency? Well, I've seen conflicting reports on this, but if you actually look at male versus female self-reported snuggle frequency, what you do see is that the female bell curve is narrower than the male bell curve, but it's not particularly shifted towards higher sexual frequency. What you see is that for men, there is a wider bell curve. There's more men that are highly promiscuous and more men that are completely sexless, but the difference is not as big as you would expect. Now, maybe everybody's lying. That's possible. But I think the data is more in accordance with there just being a physical imbalance of men versus women. Not physical as in, like, there's like China or India where they have a shortage of girls due to sex-selective abortion, but just due to the dynamics of the population pyramid. I think that explains a lot more. And again, you would have to explain how Hispanics as a group are reporting a much better dating experience in America than whites or blacks. You'd have to explain that. Because Hispanics are economically more disadvantaged, they're shorter on average, they should be much more negatively impacted by this. They should be one of the worst off out of the groups in America, but they're not. They're the best off, one of the best off. A girl online told me if asked IRL, she would lie by like a factor of 5 when talking about snuggle accounts. Yeah, but the kind of girls, the kind of e-girls that we interact with online, it's kind of like if you only interact with girls that you meet on 4chan, like on 4chan, R9K, you'd think all women are just totally irredeemable whores. But that's because that's the demographic that is on R9K, right? Like, I can tell you, and I hate to admit this, because I would prefer to believe that it's like if there's something more revolutionary going on, like this guy does. But for the most part, I do see a significant percentage of guys that are in relationships, and that are not extremely looks imbalanced. I will say that it's generally more so like men tend to be a little better looking than women, but it's not by as much of an extreme as you would have to accept as the norm if there was the 80-20 thing going on the way it's described. I'm very skeptical of that. I've always been skeptical of that because it doesn't even match female preference in terms of their behavior. Like, yes, they're hypergamous, and this is another thing that he gets into. He talks about hypergamy, but men and women are both hypergamous in the sense that, like, we're going to pursue the best options that we can. Yes, men are going to be more willing to be do extra pair copulation because there's no reproductive cost to that compared to women. But both men and women want the most attractive partners they can find. Like, it doesn't differ based on sex in that regard. And the main difference, in my opinion, and by the way, one of the ways that you can measure this, and I had to correct myself in one of my videos I made, is if you look at the historical voting record when women got the right to vote, they actually voted more conservative than men did. They, like, one of the first, like, when women were enfranchised in Germany in the Weimar Republic, they voted most for the conservative party that opposed enfranchising them and giving them the right to vote. And they were voting more conservatively than men right up until, I think it was the 1980s. And I think the reason for that was because women, at the time that this was being done, due to a combination of the economic environment and also the demographics, the gender ratio of singles, women had more of a scarcity mindset than men did when it came to partners. They were more concerned about maintaining monogamy and exclusivity and policing infidelity than the men were, because the women were at a competitive disadvantage. That's what I suspect, anyways. And then the reason why it's inverted in our day is because the balance of power has inverted. Now women have the advantage, men do not. Men are more focused on scarcity and mate guarding, and women are more focused on maximizing their options. Anyways, let's keep going. Since the birth rates had plummeted, the bourgeois class needed a way to keep the population of Western nations growing, and also to obtain more cheap labor, as the populations of Western nations were growing more and more used to relatively luxurious conditions, and therefore were becoming less and less willing to work excessively low-paying jobs. Of course, the bourgeois class was not about to bring back monogamy in order to lift the birth rates up, as that would mean ending an incredibly profitable arrangement. So instead, they opted for the cheaper solution, which was to begin the practice of merely importing continual and ceaseless waves of immigrants from the global south into Western countries, drawing from a wide range of populations. Now, this is one of the only times he mentions immigration. Again, this is what I find very interesting, because I have not interacted with a Canadian online that has not had something very important to say or to commiserate with concerning immigration. Like the fact that, and this guy not only, and by the way, when I say that, I'm not even just talking about whites, I'm including ethnics, right? Like if you guys remember Chudian Crusader, he's not white, he's Japanese, right? There's other guys that I have in my circle who are Canadian, who are much more fixated on immigration than I am in Canada. And they're ethnics, they're like Curries, but they were born here. That's the difference. And despite this, he has nothing to say about immigration other than just this handoff remark, which again is generally an anti-immigration remark, right? It's not, I suppose you could say, a racist remark, but it's an anti-immigration remark, but he doesn't have anything else to say about it. So it's not that he's afraid of not saying something. It's that it just doesn't factor into his mind. And that's, I think, a very important clue as to how extremely isolated this guy was. And men generally can't act upon their desire for hypergamy, though. That is true. That is true today. But I'm talking about, for example, when the baby boomers were just coming of age, there was even articles that were written about this called the marriage squeeze. And it was referring to baby boomer women, the earliest baby boomer women, coming of age and not being able to find men to marry. And this is like when they were in their 18 to 24 range. They couldn't find men to marry because there were just not enough men that were somewhat older than them that were the ideal target for marriage. And so they ended up getting into relationships with men that were in their age group, like the same age. And these relationships were typically far less oriented towards marriage. And they were a lot more casual, which is what a lot of these guys preferred. This is how boomers developed their weird psychology around relationships and sexuality. Where boomers really did have an abundance mentality, as the red pillars like to say, towards women, where it's like, yeah, we'll liberalize divorce, we'll normalize alternative lifestyles that are not conducive to keeping a woman loyal. And it's because they didn't have any worry about not finding a woman, because they were in a demographic situation where women were just overflowing in abundance. So of course they would, why would they care about monogamy? Why would they care about jealously policing their women, access to women? They wanted to break down the barriers to accessing other women that were not their wives, right? So it was a very different environment in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And that's where I think the sexual revolution came from. It wasn't actually women pushing for the sexual revolution when it happened. It was largely leftists, ideological leftists that were of the, what was his name? Wilhelm Reich, disciples of Wilhelm Reich, who was... he was like a Freudian Marxist who believed that sexual revolution, like overthrowing all the sexual norms in society, was necessary to bring about the communist revolution. And it wasn't particularly, there were more men that supported him than women. There were more radical leftist men in the 60s and 70s than radical leftist women. Right? And what changed was the demographic shift that changed, right? Which is what we're living with now. I just realized Tails just left me a comment here. Very reasonable, Mercer, today. If it wasn't for social media, we would still pretty much have the same dating market as Gen X, which wasn't that bad. Actually, I would say the Gen X dating market was kind of not good. Because if you think about what I was describing with baby boomers, they were the bulge, a youth bulge. And so the average age for women was quite low, and men as well. The average age in the population was low. There was an abundance of young women relative to men who would be willing or capable of marrying them and providing for them. And so this created a situation where it was very easy to get access to a woman. Now, with Gen X are the children of the generation that came before the baby boomers. These were silent gen. And they were a smaller generation because the silent generation was the first generation to really start contracepting in large numbers. And so they were about, I think it was 2/3 or half the size of the baby boomer generation. And so when they came of age, they had the opposite problem, where they had this top-heavy supply of boomers. And a lot of the men at that point, because remember, boomers got married very young, but then they divorced. There are some boomers that end up going on their 4th, 5th marriages. It's crazy. And so there was a lot of these freshly divorced boomers in their 30s, and suddenly they were free. And this was because a lot of Gen Xers were born in the 70s. So this is in the 90s. They were free to start going after these Gen X women, and this put a lot of pressure on Gen X men. I don't think it's a coincidence that guys like Steve Hoka, and there's another guy, if you guys remember, Monday, F.A. Monday, he was another one, who I'm pretty sure he's a Gen Xer. I'm pretty sure he was a younger Gen Xer. But I think this was the first sign of these guys emerging. Was with the Gen Xers, these TFLers, as we should say. And then with the millennials, because millennials were the children of baby boomers, there was what is known as an echo boom. And so the millennials were another bulge underneath the Gen Xers that came of age. And it wasn't as good as how the baby boomers had it, but if you talk to older millennials who were teenagers and adults in the 2000s, they'll tell you about how, like, you could talk with a girl in a chat room on MSN and then just meet her, and it was actually kind of degenerate as well, because there was a lot of promiscuity in the younger Gen X or the older millennial population, because it was once again, it was easy to get access to girls. This was the start of dating apps as well, and online dating. Actually, it started with online dating, and then it transitioned into dating apps. And that golden age, I suppose you could say, I mean, I wouldn't consider it that way because I'm sympathetic more with the traditionalists in this regard. But for the guys that just are focused on access to sex, the golden age for that ended around the 2010s. The beginning of the end was, I think it was 2014 is when you started to see the inflection point. If you guys remember that graph I showed of sexlessness for men, the inflection point was around 2014, and then it started to really skyrocket. And I think this is where, like, my section of the millennial generation and younger, and Zoomers, these are, like, we're the ones that are getting caught in this now, because Zoomers are the children of Gen Xers, so they're also a small generation, relatively speaking. So, yeah, but we're sort of in the same situation that the early Gen Xers were in. Zog gave FA a wife who was a glowy and his channel was off. It's easy to shut down Goyim when they notice. Yeah, you know what? I mean, I'm not even saying that he was compromised or not. He might have been. But I do definitely think he was indicative of the first signs of that. Like, if you guys remember, do you guys remember the 40-Year-Old Virgin? When did that come out? I think it was the 2000s. Yeah, 2005. Well, if somebody was, so the 40-Year-Old Virgin, if he was born in 2000, or if he was 40 years old in 2005, he would have had to have been born in 1965, right? And that's just about the cutoff between baby boomers and Gen X. Kind of makes you think. Anyways, Gen X dating market was better than Millennial and Gen Z due to economy job market being better. You are right about that, Javier. You are right about that. That is true. And yeah, younger Gen X in particular did have an easier time due to older millennial women being accessible, especially with the 2008 financial crisis fucking over the careers of a lot of millennial men. The Gen Xers who already had established careers by that point, they were in a really good prime position to pick up wives from these older millennials. Though, I mean, the downside to that is that a lot of the older millennials were total nut jobs, right? Like, this is like the peak purple-haired libtard types without any real variation. Like, pretty much all older millennial women are those kind of libtards, especially college-educated ones. But, yeah, I don't know much about it. I just remember FA Monday from all those years ago. And I'm pretty sure he was a Gen Xer. Anyways, I'll keep going with this, because if I bloviate like this, I'll never get through it. So on page 21, he talks about, and this is where, when I first read this is where I was thinking of that video I made. He says, to examine this chaotic catastrophe in an orderly manner, we will view the effects of the hypergamy state on each of the three main socio-biological classes of contemporary Western society in descending order with regard to the amount and quality of intimacy that each class has access to. The three classes are, in descending order, the males that are sexually desired and considered attractive by females, the females themselves, and lastly, the common males, which are the majority of males. He spends a lot of time talking about the males, the favored males, I think is the term that he uses. And he really idealizes their life as this sort of never-ending stream of conquests and achievements and sexual fulfillment, romantic fulfillment. And this is where I think his isolation peaks through, because having worked with a lot of different guys of a lot of different attractiveness levels and being able to code switch to neurotypical to the extent that they'll talk about their personal lives with me, I can tell you that a lot of these, it's a tiny percentage of these guys that are actually having a really qualitatively superior life to even a normie. Like, they are somewhat, like, they are when it comes to dating. But even then, it's more like they have access to things. That doesn't mean they're guaranteed happiness, unless they're like an 8 out of 10 and they're a trust fund kid, right? If they're an 8 out of 10 trust fund kid, then yes, they are the favored male that this guy describes. But for the most part, like, I even knew I worked with a guy who was 6'4", and he looked like that guy who played Ragnar Lothbrok in the Viking series. If you guys remember that Viking series, he looked like the guy who played Ragnar Lothbrok. And so he was very attractive, and he did have, when it came to women, he had a pretty easy time. Like, he was actually living with his girlfriend's family. They took him in because he got kicked out of his own house. But that's what I mean. Like, he had a fucked up family dynamic. He ended up getting kicked out of his family's house. Like, his mother was an alcoholic or something. Or, well, his parents were together, but they were really bad alcoholics, and there was a lot of violence. And he was fucked up in that way. Like, he was fucked up from that. And even though he had the looks and he had the... And, like, he actually did do modeling. I remember him mentioning that to me. Even then, you could tell that he was not in a really good mental condition or psychological condition. It's not like everything was solved by him just being attractive, you know? Now, for women, I think it's different, because the relationship between men and women is qualitatively different. Like, if you're an attractive man, you can... you'll have women be attracted to you and want a relationship with you, and including sexual, even if you don't have anything else going for you in life. That is true. You do have access to that. But you're not going to have women swoop into your life and rescue you out of your own personal problems, whether it's socioeconomic or it's, I don't know, living conditions, whatever. That's just not what women do. Like, the Jeremy Meeks stories are actually exceedingly rare. Like, those kind of stories where a guy is so attractive that some billionaire heiress marries him or whatever, extremely rare. Even the most attractive guys, it's highly unlikely that happens. If you're a woman, on the other hand, it's a completely different story. So I would say that women actually, if we were to look at the median woman, I would still say she's still doing better. Because in addition to, you have to remember, in addition to the benefits that she has being a woman and having men competing for her, where men will also want to provide resources to her, and like the whole point of a man is to improve her life in some material way. In addition to that, the state is organized around providing resources and employment opportunities and all these other things for women in a way that is not the case for men. Right? And this is where race intersects here, because like, this is also where if you're the right kind of race of a man, you will get opportunities that a white man would not. So, and this is particularly the case in Canada. I'm pretty sure that there's official discrimination, at least in government jobs. There's official discrimination in everything, like they call them racialized Canadians, which is basically everyone except for a white man. So, and the fact that he's completely blissfully unaware of this is just staggering. That is a huge factor. Like, being an ethnic and being able to gain access to employment on the basis of that, like gainful employment that you can do something with, that to me is as valuable as being a 7 out of 10. Because what's the point of being like a 7 plus out of 10, but you're completely economically alienated? Like you can't even enter into any productive fields because you're shut out due to your race. Like being attractive at that point, unless you can find some woman who's going to wife you up and provide for you, like there's nothing you can do with that. Like you have no gainful, or you have no forward mobility. So yeah, this is another thing that I find annoying about him. And it also makes me think he was probably a NEET. Again, I don't know much about his story. I didn't look into it, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was a NEET for a long period of time. Anyways, let's continue on. This is another thing where he's right, actually, and he nails it. And this is something that I've experienced, and he puts it in better words than I would, actually. So on page 24, he says, "As for the female childhood experience in the West, there is a similar situation to that of the favored males, in that the female child is far more likely to be cherished, lauded, encouraged, heard, protected, and genuinely loved than the common male child is. It is even the case that in the classroom, young girls are treated far better on average than young boys are by their teachers." This is true, actually. I think there was a study on this that showed that when you blind teachers to the sex of their students that they're marking, if you remove any indicators of their sex, boys actually experience an improvement in marks over girls. So there's actually active discrimination against boys across the academic spectrum, from grade school well up into higher education, on the basis of them being boys. So this is actually, and it's both men and women that are doing this bias. So, anyways, all of this causes young girls to be vastly more sociable, contented, together, motivated, and confident than most young boys, and this in turn helps girls gain more meaningful, socially active, and fulfilling adolescences. Now, this is what I was talking about in my mall surveillances, where I've looked around at the mall and seen the dynamics of the environment. You do see attractive white kids with girlfriends, and they're pretty much looks matched. And you'll see millennials all over the place across the looks spectrum, and they're generally pretty much looks matched, I'd have to say, the older millennial couples. But what you don't see, you see a striking absence of 5 and below, like sub-6 white boys, teenagers. You see a striking lack of them. You do see sub-6 white girls around, but you see far fewer sub-6 white boys around. And I think to a large extent, this is because a lot of them are staying home. Like they're genuinely demoralized growing up in this environment. And they don't have the positive reinforcement from their peers, and their families typically ignore them. Compare that to like a family from a more patriarchal society, like South Asia or the Middle East, where the boys are typically spoiled and they're treated like princes, and they're highly valued in the family more than girls are. Even if you don't have a lot of interaction with women, if you are treated like you're a special person and highly valuable because you're a boy in your family, that's going to positively reflect on your self-image, and you won't get demoralized like this. And I suspect that this is definitely happening. So he's right here. It says, "Just like favored males, the females are quite quickly able to pass all of the important social milestones, and during their young adulthood, intimacy exists for them in abundance. This reality is true for most females generally, and not just for the most attractive of them." And that's really an age pill, actually, because you do reach a certain age where you realize, and it varies based on the society you're in, right? But you realize that the socially acceptable age for you to be in a relationship with a foid is it could be, who knows, like let's say I'm 33. In Canada, I could probably get with a girl who's like 25. That would be like the cutoff for when it would start looking weird by other people. And you could say, well, who cares what other people think? Well, the Floyd does. The women do. Like they'll be concerned on how it reflects on them. But then if you think about what's the median 25-year-old girl's relationship experiences? Well, typically they're going to have multiple long-term boyfriends, and that's in the ideal outcome, right? That if it's not so ideal, it'll be far more short-term boyfriends and maybe some other types of sexual liaisoning. Especially when they're in college. It's very common for college girls to be invited to parties for free and provided drugs like cocaine, for example. And the idea is that they're going to give them free drugs and free alcohol, whatever, with the hope that they lose their inhibition and do things they wouldn't normally do by not being on those substances. And I've heard stories about this, by the way. Like, I've heard it from the horse's mouth. These kind of parties and what happens at these parties. And we're not talking like slags from the trailer park or whatever. We're talking like upper middle class, like decently accredited college attending girls. And then you have to sit down and be like, how am I supposed to relate to this? How am I supposed to relate to this woman in any way? Not only is she younger than me, but I'm at the relationship experience level of a 14-year-old boy or like a 16-year-old boy. She's already all the way over here. She's the more experienced one in this relationship, and it kind of inverts the dynamics. Like, how are you supposed to form a relationship? So it creates this permanent state of isolation, I think, for a lot of guys. Let me just catch up on the chats here. I think Raymond is a wicked man. Blue Skies Media is now an evil man too. Blue Skies Media, I think he went crazy, didn't he? I have some recordings of videos that he did like near the end of his YouTube career. I don't know if he still does anything, but I remember, I don't know if it was the end of his YouTube career, but I stopped watching him after a certain point. But he was doing these videos where he looked like he was tripping out on drugs or whatever. That to me was when I was like, okay, there's not much more I can get out of this. And I mean, I'm sympathetic with him because I'm pretty sure he married a girl and then she died of something. And he was an incel after that point. So, I mean, I actually think he's a sympathetic guy. I felt bad for him. But he was clearly kind of losing it, right? And I think he also is a little bit on the histrionic side, where he was sort of exaggerating his emotional state for the camera in some ways. But I'm still sympathetic to him, though. Because that is a really fucked up situation to go through. Like, not only do you get widowed, or, well, I don't know if he's married to the girl, but you know what I mean. Like, not only do you lose your significant other, but now you're in a dating environment where you're completely relegated to non-existence. Like, I could understand why he was his mental state was so insane. No, I mean, Blue Skies Media would do videos on how he would try and hit up like the most disgusting women he wasn't even attracted to, and they would look at him like he was a subhuman. That's and what I like about him actually is that he wasn't like a stereotypical inky, right? Like he was a guy who was into, I think he would make dubstep or something. Or drum and bass. It was drum and bass that he made. He made a lot of drum and bass music. Like you could tell that he was very much normie coded in a lot of ways. Like he wasn't a social autist, like for example the guy whose manifesto I'm looking at. So in that way he was quite sympathetic. Or like his experiences were more like you couldn't chalk them up to social awkwardness, is what I'm saying. But anyways, so that was another thing that he got right on this page. Now, page 26. He talks about high school a little bit, which is a little revealing. I mean, he's right about this as well. But he says, in addition to this danger, there prevails in the Western high school itself a sinister and brutish sexual culture in which many girls, even those of the younger grades, are brought quickly into the hypergamous social practice, especially so at the hideously vile events known as parties. This is where I'll get into it, but I'll finish this. Where favored males, who are often out of high school in their 20s and very socially dominated, violate countless girls, commonly many young girls, in one single night. I just love how he put this. Especially so at the vile, hideous events known as parties, where favored males, who are often out of high school in their 20s, like, it was very, like, when I read that, I was like, this reads like a 1930s or 40s, like, upper middle class, very prudish Anglo wrote this. And again, this is another area where I can sympathize with him, because I'm kind of like how he is. Like, I am actually on the prudish side as well. And he is right about this. One of the issues that I think a lot of teenagers, both boys and girls, have to deal with is that there's such a stigma associated with virginity as a boy, and it's seen as so important to lose it, that they will go after and pressure girls into sex, not even necessarily because obviously they have the drive to have sex, but they're more focused on being able to say they lost it than actually enjoying sex itself. Like, that's the more important part. And then you end up in situations where they pressure these girls, and we're talking like young teens, we're talking like 14, 15, into these sexual encounters that neither side really is that keen on, but the boy is primarily focused on losing this low status signal that is his virginity. So in that sense, I agree with him on that. And this is something that socially we've created, particularly with stigmatizing virginity among boys. And you still see it to this day. Like, any kind of criticism of dating and relationships between men and women, there's every one of these guys who takes like a critical point of view when it comes to women feels the need to qualify what he says with, I am successful with women. I've been able to date women, all these women. My body count is 50. And the implication is like, he's not speaking for himself. He's speaking on behalf of these other guys that are struggling. Like, it's such a stigma and such a low status association to be a virgin that, this creates these environments where it's like a weird pressure situation. And obviously it's not good for girls. It's not good for boys. And I don't know how to fix it, because girls in many ways reinforce this. Because they also grant status to these sexually successful guys, and they view virginity with stigma as well. So what are you supposed to say? I mean, men are mostly responding to how women perceive, or how they think women perceive them. If women clearly signaled that this was not something important to them, that a man actually is more important to signify, a man's virginity is not important to her, other than as like a technical thing, like she'll have to put in a little work, I guess, to train him in a way, I suppose. But other than that, if women were to signal that, this culture of sexual pressure would disappear. It would disappear tomorrow. So, what do you say? Now, by the way, I'm not somebody who thinks that. I would not say that women are repulsed by virginity in men. I would say it's more like something that, it's kind of like red hair, where there's a lot of guys that think that being a redhead as a man is unattractive, but largely that's because the phenotypes of men who come from countries with a high frequency of gingerism tend to be kind of ugly. If you're a facially attractive man with red hair, women will love you. And similarly, if you are a Tim Tebow kind of virgin, where Tim Tebow is like this, I think he was like an evangelical or something, and he was saving himself for marriage, but he's an attractive athlete. I guarantee you no woman is going to say, oh, well, Tim Tebow's expressing interest in me, but he's a virgin. That's too stigmatic. I can't be involved with him, even though he's a football player and tall and attractive. Like, no, there's no way. It's not that it's in and of itself stigmatic. Maybe to some extent it is, but it's mostly because of what it's associated with. Because men who are virgins are overwhelmingly involuntarily virgins, right? But still, anyways, I mean, that's something that women could still resolve. And let me just catch up on the comments here. New guys who paid street workers to lose their V cards ASAP. Yeah, it's extremely sad, man. I can't think of a... Look, I'm not judging. I'm not judging in the sense that I'm actually deeply sympathetic. Or empathetic. But there's just something really almost nihilistic about that. Like, I understand it. I understand the pressure, but I just, man... It's just got to be really... It's got to be really sad, man. Especially if you're the type of person who does feel a lot of, who's sort of naturally inclined to pair bonding, I suppose. I can't think of a more painful experience, actually. Having a V card is a huge fail, especially after high school, let alone after college. Yeah, pretty much. My sister argues men are single because men aren't good enough and have life uneasy. Yeah, well, don't even talk to women about that. V card is gross to them if you're old enough, like 30 plus. Yeah, for sure. Well, they assume that there's something wrong with you at that point, right? But yeah. Anyways, I'll keep going with this. And then on page 27, it seems that when given the choice, women would far rather endure the present conditions than they would the generally more socially stable monogamous systems of the past. And the reason for this is that under the present hypergamous system, they are granted free access to intimacy with the most attractive of males, which is something that they unceasingly desire above all else, even if it means they may face maltreatment from their favored male partners. Yeah, kind of. I would say it's more so that they're just... I wouldn't say it's so much that they're actively choosing to... It's not like women are like, oh, in this environment, I can pursue the most attractive man, so I'm going to meticulously calculate this and only pursue the most attractive man I can find. It's more so that women are just given a glut of options, so it's very easy for them to exit a relationship and enter another one. So it disincentivizes them from being stable and possessive and invested in their own relationships. And of course, there is obviously women are going to pursue the more attractive man over the less attractive man, but I don't think it's that they're actively thinking that. Like, it's not psychologically going through their heads. It's more so that the demographic balance allows them to exit and enter relationships very easily. And again, this is the difference between men and women. If you look at what men will promote when men are in the power position in terms of the gender ratio of singles versus women, men will tend to try and break down rigid barriers to sexual behavior. Like, they'll want to reduce the stigma around extramarital sex, premarital sex, because the natural instinct for most men is to widen their access to women. You know, a lot of men, if the environment is such that they have access to, like, it's very easy to get a woman outside of marriage, it's going to be a constant temptation to support breaking down the institution of marriage. You know, whereas for women, it would be the opposite impulse. Whereas for women, it's not so much that women are constantly tempted by extramarital sex and they just want to have, like, They want to be polygamous the way that a lot of men are. It's more so that they want to be able to enter and exit relationships very easily. So they're very serial monogamous is typically how it works. And when women are powerful in the sexual marketplace, it's serial monogamy that they're going to support. It's not polygamy in the sense that they're going to be promiscuous. If anything, you see a reduction in sexual activity as women become more powerful in the sexual market, because they're going to restrict access to sex for men outside of the strict avenues that women create, and they're going to ensure that women have as much freedom to dispose of these men or do whatever as they can, like within the confines of their relationships. So I disagree with him here a little bit. I disagree on the motivation somewhat. I don't even think he's really that wrong, but I think he's assuming too much. He's projecting, I think, male sexuality a little too much on women. Anyways. And then he writes here, page 28, in the present times, it is now the case that practically 100% of attractive girls in Western societies do indeed belong to the bourgeois and middle classes, having been lifted entirely out of the blue-collar sphere. Lots of them simply go through life with the greatest of ease, and since the culture and institutions of the hypergamy state inherently favor them, they easily gain relaxed and lucrative white-collar careers that require very little work, while additionally a great number of them become models, actresses, and musicians. But this practice seems to be becoming somewhat irrelevant because increasingly such women no longer need to engage in elaborate swindling processes with deluded old men, as almost all attractive females are now able to simply gain thousands of admirers who are mostly desperate common males on certain social media platforms, and these hapeless and ignorant male vassals are all too happy to throw away money at such females, whom they feverishly desire. On some of these platforms, like OnlyFans, attractive women can and do go so far as to upload videos of their debauched sexual activities with favored males, footage that intimacy-starved and degenerated common males pay to see, to the profit of both the female video creators and the wealthy bourgeois owners of the online platforms. It's terribly obvious that overall all of this certainly benefits the males of the bourgeois and middle classes, who are themselves most often of the favored socio-biological class. And let nobody convince you that the more wealthy of these males do not occasionally indulge in the blackest depths of depravity and twisted perversions, together with countless attractive women of differing backgrounds within various orgies and other such hideous events that take place in their skyscrapers, mansions, and many luxury hotels in major cities. I mean, he's kind of correct on that regard, but like when you're talking about those kind of men who can engage in that kind of libertinism, it's a very small percentage, because you'd have to have a lot of money to be able to engage in that sort of shit. I mean, I guess technically you don't need to be rich per se, but I would say the percentage that actively indulge in that is pretty small. Largely, again, because women are not interested in permitting it. Like, women are not interested in this kind of sexual exploration. Like, if you look at where the stuff, because he'll come back to this, he'll talk about these degenerate bourgeois that will engage in these promiscuous sexual behaviors with others, and like they try and seduce each other's wives. I think he quotes a communist about that, and or a communist writer, I should say, and that was true at the time that the writers were promoting this stuff, because it was mostly elite men in a male-dominated society where open marriages in those societies basically meant taking on mistresses. Like, women had first of all, women don't like doing that, especially if they're with a high-value man. They're not interested in competing with other women sexually. Whenever you do give women power, this kind of sexual activity they typically restrict. Like, the sexual activity that they promote is it's going to be more Like they'll go on trips, like they'll find like themes that they get fixed on. So they'll go to Latin America and find a Latin lover, or something along those lines. And also, I mean, the books that they read, it's always, the formula is always a very high status, powerful, brooding man is inexplicably smitten and obsessed. And by the way, this powerful man is respected by other men too. So he's a high status man, is inexplicably smitten and obsessed with the female protagonist who's completely ordinary and unimpressive. But he has these dark impulses, sexual impulses that he needs to have serviced. And she, like, this is if you remember 50 Shades of Grey, like that was sort of that was the entire theme of the book, or the series of books. It was multiple books. It was like S&M with a super high status man. That's the kind of stuff women like. Like, women don't like this promiscuous kind of sexual exploration at all. Right? But that's, that's just neither here nor there. Let's just keep going here. It says, page 31, if you're among the dispossessed yourself, and if you are reading this, there is a very good chance that you are, bingo, he got us there, then you must let nobody, including yourself, convince you that this loss is some minor trifle, or that it is anything other than an entirely devastating plague of dread, which wreaks exceedingly terrible damage on the health of the common male population. This is where, like, a theme that recurs on this is that he talks about how liberal societies will blame men individually. Like, they'll come up with individualistic explanations for their structural problems. And if you say that there is a structural issue, it's due to your personal pathologies of some kind, and that you don't want to take responsibility for your situation. I think there's probably some cases where you could say that's true. But I think in a lot of cases, it's because they want to avoid talking about these issues. And most importantly, they don't want to have a class of people that they view as the enemy, which is what, if you're a straight white man in America, and I would even say like straight men in general are disfavored, at least relative to their own women. They don't want you to develop a sense of self-righteousness in any way. That it's not that you are personally flawed and this is due to your personal failing, but that there's, like, you are being wronged in a structural way and you are resentful to the people that have wronged you in this way. They do not want you thinking that way. Because of that's where you can start to be motivated to do things other than bed rot or self-improve, right? He's right about that. Let me see here. He talks a little bit more about high school here. Humiliating experiences in high school. Perhaps he maintains a small circle of friends, few or no friends at all, but he's not granted access to a thriving and large community of close and active friends. I mean, this is, I don't remember, I don't know. He was 25, so he's like 8 years younger than me. So when I was in school, I know that when I was in school in Ottawa, it was very socially isolating because it was a very diverse school, and everybody was just broken up into their own little tribal factions for the most part, right? So you would have the Somali kids, you would have the Arab kids, you would have the non-Somali black kids, you'd have the white kids, and there was very little cross-communication. And contrary to what you might think, this did not make the white kids more social with each other. They were, if anything, they were more withdrawn, more individualistic and isolated. Then I went to a high school in my mother's town, which was about an hour's drive out of Ottawa. And it was like 40,000 people in that town. So it was fairly, it wasn't like remote, but it was not part of the suburbs. And it was, the high school I went to there was an all-white school pretty much. There was like 2 Asian girls and 1 black guy. And everyone else in that school, there was a couple hundred kids, was white. And even though I was socially very withdrawn and isolated, even then I was still able to get sort of a circle of acquaintances. Whereas when I went to high school in Ottawa, it was completely isolated. Like I didn't interact with anybody, and nobody interacted with me. Nobody wanted to talk to me. I didn't want to talk to anybody. Whereas when I was in this other high school, it was like I would talk to my teachers in a sort of more friendly way, less formal way. I would talk to the other kids, like I would eat lunch with them. They would let me eat lunch with them. It was a different experience. Now, I don't know where he did his attack in Montreal, and Montreal is a bigger city than Ottawa. So probably, if anything, it was even worse for him. So what he's describing here, it's like, let me see here. In the exceptionally rare cases that he is granted intimacy with any of his female peers, he is almost always only allowed to enter into fleeting and brief experiences. But those are only the most lucky of the common males, and for the greater part of that class, unending loneliness sinks his fangs into them, slowly draining the vital essence from within. Now, he uses a lot of poetic language that kind of drags on, but like you could tell, this is a big factor. He's probably been isolated his entire life, just based on how he talks. Highly intelligent, completely socially isolated. And another thing that occurred to me is that he's very, and as I said earlier, like you can really detect the Anglo thinking structure. Like you could tell that he's very deeply passionate about his beliefs, and this is a really key factor. If you are Anglo-brained in any way, and I don't know if it's a genetic predisposition or if it's a cultural thing or both, but he is very careful to always structure his passions around concrete empirical things. So you don't get a lot of, you do get some, but you don't get a lot of like passionate, agonizing and shaking his fist at the skies sort of writing. And it's funny because I've gotten some criticism from some people that I know that I'm too matter of fact and I'm too dry with my streams, where I just sort of talk about studies, and I talk about abstract stuff. I don't really get into my personal feelings about things and like what I've experienced, what I've went through. Part of it is that I find it kind of pretentious to talk about myself in that way, but also it just doesn't come natural. Like the natural way that Anglos think is we need to construct a concept of reality based on these like really hard empirical facts, and then we can build up our beliefs on, like, we can build towards what we're passionate about on these foundations. And you could tell that he does this a lot. Like he is very careful to avoid, like if you compare that to like a typical manifesto from some guy who does, what they do, you're going to hear a lot of like personal invectives. You're going to hear about how I am taking revenge on this society that has rejected me. Like that sort of really personal language. It's very much absent in this. And this is, I think, a really strong sign of an Anglo brain. Let me just catch up on the live chat here. They say single moms exist because the men are bad. I ask her who chooses the bad. Yeah, there's just no point, Javier. I just don't like when it comes to talking to women that are just normie tier or whatever, that you're friendly with or that are related to you in some way. I just do this, like, what do normie people believe? Okay, I'm just gonna parrot that. Like, that's how I do it typically. V card for Volcel Superstars doesn't count. Yeah, I don't know about that, but sure. Effing escorts is the best strategy at this point. Treat women like what they are. Maybe, but the problem is it's not even something that you can rationally do. Like, it's not a rational thing. It's like if somebody is very sensitive, like I could tell this guy is like an emotionally sensitive guy. And we'll get into it further down in his writings. Like, you could actually tell he's very sensitive, and he's the kind of guy that if he if this Hatfield kid went to an escort to lose his V card, it would probably devastate him afterwards. Like, you could tell just based on, like, even though he's very empirical, he's very dry in how he writes things. Like, you get, like, there are passages where you could tell very much that he's that kind of guy. He's unironically, like, when I hadn't finished the reading this thing when I named the stream Sensitive Young Man, Writings of the Sensitive Young Man or whatever. He's unironically one of these types. Like, I don't even mean like the meme version. I mean, he's genuinely one of these types of guys. And these are the types of guys that escort maxing would not work for. Escort maxing would do a lot more damage than help. And is that Israel getting hit with missiles? Yeah, I've got it running in the background instead of the typical blue background because it's a little more visually appealing. And I'm not going to be putting a copy of this guy's writings on the screen for obvious reasons. I'm just reading it off of a page. Like, I've taken notes that I've put on a Google Doc. I'm not I'm not going to pull the full thing up. Just trying to be cautious. So, did you read Charles Bukowski? He was one of us. Charles Bukowski is the literally me person. Yeah, I remember reading about Charles Bukowski. He was like a nobody until his middle age or something, and then he made it big as a poet or something like that, right? Which is pretty interesting. Though I highly doubt that would ever happen for me. Like, I would say he's not one of us in the sense that, like, maybe he started out as one of us, but none of us are ending that way, right? You should look into traveling to Uruguay. It's 88% white. Yeah, it is 88% white, but that's the problem, actually, because Uruguayan women are almost indistinguishable from Spanish women. And Spanish women are extremely libtarded. Like, at that point, you might as well go to Sweden or something. Like, you're going to have as much luck. Like, it's very libtarded, very purple hair, that sort of thing. So, probably the thing that saves Brazil is that it's not too white. It's just brown enough that the libtardism is limited to a certain degree. Anyways, let's see here. During his sadistic deprivation, the dispossessed male is forced to observe the more attractive and popular males proceed to feast themselves on an endless banquet of thriving friendships and vast quantities of warm, pulsating, voluptuous intimacy. God damn. See, I find his writing a little too flowery. I mean, I can appreciate when people put effort into trying to write something elegant, but like, if you're writing what this guy is writing, the M word, you want to be concise. You don't want to write like a 100-page essay using a whole bunch of flowery language, almost like poetic language, because that's not going to, like, people are just going to get bored. Most people, if they're actually looking at what you're trying to write. You know, constructive criticism for him, even though he can't make use of it now. But yeah, he does. He is right about that. I mean, that was something that was really depressing for me. Was seeing, even though it was only a certain percentage, even when I was in high school, the amount of active dating that was going on was really going down. But it was still like at least a third of the seniors, maybe 40%, were still actively dating and had relationships. And it was very sad for me that I could never experience that, but so I get that. And he says, on the other hand, for the common male, the closest thing to intimacy which he is allowed to undergo is the twisted and debasing experience of watching graphic porn through his phone screen in the darkness of his room late at night. Upon being cut off from the very crucial developmental romantic experiences of adolescence, the common male psyche receives terrible and enduring damage. The weaker of these types, in their isolation, often get severely addicted to pornography and develop a monstrous perversions, and their situation is really the inverse reflection of that of the worst of the favored males, who develop similar perversions, though out of excess instead of deprivation. And you know, this is a hard pill to swallow for a lot of guys, but he's actually 100% right. He's 100% right about that. I don't actually think this is ChatGPT. I was reading this whole thing. I did not detect any AI. If anything, it was way too elaborate to be AI written. Like the thing about ChatGPT and other AIs, you can detect them really easily by them using phraseology like it's not X but Y, or they'll do things in three. It's like the Trinity syndrome, where they'll always make things they'll list things in threes. So it'll be like three examples, three characteristics, three explanations. Like that's one of the ways you can detect AI. But this is something that a lot of guys don't want to hear, but he is right about pornography. I mean, there is, look, let's just be honest, okay? If you are watching another man have sex with a woman from the third person perspective and you're masturbating to it, this is inherently going to produce perversions, like cuckold perversions. It's just going to do it because you're associating sexual gratification with effectively voyeurism, the third person viewing of other people having sex. Like it's actually going to become unnatural for you. It's going to feel strange for you to be the active participant in that. So and when you don't have a limiting factor of another person, it's very easy to get into very extreme perversions, because there's nothing really stopping you other than your own will. So, on the one hand, it's kind of like alcohol addiction in the Soviet Union. Like, because of how life under communism was so depressing, people would become alcoholics very easily. So on the one hand, I understand why. It's like I understand why these men are often drinking themselves to death. On the other hand, it's also actively destructive, and we should admit that. The way to resolve this is by dealing with the underlying problem that is creating this urge for addiction in the first place, right? And this is another thing. Women love to complain about porn. And what I bring up with them, like I'm talking about the feminists, right? What I bring up concerning that is, yeah, there was a war that was fought by the conservatives against porn in the 70s. And you guys you didn't side with the conservatives when you could have. The conservatives in the 70s, the moral majority, these people, that were trying to stop pornography, they were also opposed to abortion, and that was the feminist golden calf. Abortion, like having the right to kill your baby, is just extremely critical for feminists. And as a result, they didn't side with the conservatives because they saw the conservatives as oppressing women in different ways. Bullshit like that. Well, this is the world that you've created. You allowed the liberal feminists to ally with the business. Wow. Look, we know who pioneered the pornography industry, right? There were books written about this. Bootleggers and Smut Hounds by what's his name? Gershon something. It was a Jew, okay? And he was writing about how this is all Jewish, effectively. Pornography started, it was dominated by, what was his name? Al Goldstein, I believe, was he the one who did Hustler magazine, Al Goldstein? And he explicitly said he was promoting pornography because he wanted to defile the values and morals of Catholic girls. He was specifically talking about the Catholic Church. So, this could make me a cuck or a simp or whatever for agreeing at least in principle with the feminists on pornography. But I would say to them, in practice, you've allowed this to end up where it is because you refused to compromise on anything else. It's kind of like the left, where the left ends up being overruled by corporate overlords because they refuse to compromise on any of the culture war issues with the nationalist right wing. It's like, how about we stop immigration and we allow conservative states to have their own culture separate from the liberal states, and in exchange we'll put all these limits on the capitalist class. And the leftists are like, no, we can't do that. We can't allow that. You have to. We're going to impose all of our demands on you, and as a result, the neoliberals on both sides win. right? It's feminists were the same way with pornography. You know, we could have reestablished a more conservative social environment where it would, again, we would have more stable families, we would have a functioning courtship system in place, perhaps, but yeah, they refuse to compromise on women's liberties, women's sexual freedoms. They refuse to compromise on them. You know, so that's how we got there. But anyways, there's one thing that was just kind of funny about this. On page 35, he says, some of the disagreeable characteristics of the average Western woman in a relationship with the common Western male appears as following. I mean, most of it's just like, oh, she's mean and she doesn't, she gets fat afterwards, like stuff like that. But it's one of the funny things that he said was, the mutilation and distortion of her body through piercings, excessive tattoos, and so-called cosmetic surgeries. Look, I gotta be honest, there's a lot of dudes who seem to be into that. Like, I've known guys, like, this is something that a lot of normie, or a lot of, like, online manosphere types don't seem to realize. There is actually a pretty significant subgroup of men who are actively, like, they like girls that have the tattoos and piercings and that, like, have the punk look. It's a thing, you know? Like, that's the reason why there are women like that. If they were not able to, like, if they were not desirable in any way to at least some men, they wouldn't be doing that, right? But, I mean, in principle, I still agree with them, but having this live stream in the background while I am downloading fat anime girl pictures. Yeah, well, it's over for you Zoomers. You guys are too far gone. So this is like a warning stream to Gen Alpha. You know, Gen Alpha should be listening to incel stuff at age 12, 11, 10, right? So they're going to hear this stuff before they develop a sex drive. Maybe they'll learn. Before it's too late and they get addicted to fat anime girl pictures. E. Michael Jones, libido dominandi. Yeah, that was, I actually used to correspond with him. Like, not correspond in the sense that he would write letters or whatever, but, like, I would write letters a couple times to his magazine, and he would publish them a few times. And there was a few of them that I wrote where I talked about the impact of the sexual revolution on Gen X culture and later culture in terms of, like, how this manifested in disordered music. Like, and I used Nirvana as an example, like how sort of pessimistic and dark in a lot of ways grunge and Nirvana was compared to the baby boomer stuff, which was super high pitched and cheery. And you know, what's the most dramatic thing that boomers would write songs about? It would be writing songs about one of their roommates not paying rent on time or some bullshit, right? Can't stand tattered up women with septum piercings. Can't wait until this fad dies. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of it myself, but there's some guys that are. So, anyways, let's keep going here. Oh, yeah, this is it's funny. Page 38, he says, here we will begin where we left off in the last section with the common males. We will look at cases which more clearly reveal the present state of things for that socio-biological class. Our first subject is an anonymous male who was 33 years old at the time that he made the following post on Reddit. Now, I'm not going to go after the post because, rookie mistake, anybody who reads anything on Reddit, they should know that 90% of the time it's bullshit. Don't believe anything you read on Reddit. Like, it's completely worthless. There's so many guys that have weird cuck fantasies, and there's also a lot of girls that they like writing, like, dramatic stories and then seeing people believe them. Like, you can usually tell if it's a woman writing, like, their imagined relationship drama of some kind versus a guy writing a cuck fanfic. But that's what most of Reddit is. It's completely unhinged. Like, never take anything from Reddit seriously. And unfortunately, this guy got hit with Reddit. And, I mean, it's the typical, like, I married a girl and she stopped having sex with me. I'm really angry about this. Like, it's that sort of stuff, which does happen. It's true, right? But this is why, You don't get married, right? Let me see what else we got here. Okay, page 45. In the West, they are essentially nothing other than mere slaves, whose only purpose is to, and he's talking about excess men here, whose only purpose is to toil away endlessly so that women and favored males can indulge themselves as they please in a surging orgy of inordinate sexuality and other sensory pleasures, while either not working at all or not working as hard as the dispossessed males, who overwhelmingly are the ones being overworked in warehouses, construction sites, factories, and other such proletarian workplaces. They are objectively the ones who hold up all of society. Now, this is a very Canadian thing he said, because this is basically what is happening in Canada. You have a huge segment of the population that is basically relegated to this slave work. And they're all guys, pretty much. And the girls, I think it was something like 15 or 20% of the female population is employed by the government, the federal government directly, and then there's a huge percentage that are employed by provincial governments or other in some way or another publicly funded enterprises. Like, it's the way that our economies are structured, women are structurally privileged economically. And this is another thing that I find annoying that he doesn't bring up. I don't know if it's because he's a Marxist and he doesn't like criticizing state interference in the economy, but a huge factor here is women getting a lot of preferential positions, DEI jobs, like make work jobs, adult daycare shit, over men. You know, especially in areas where men are likely to dominate, women get enormous advantages in them. Anything tech related, you know, and especially as these other opportunities dry up, as it becomes less feasible to get a adult daycare job as some kind of consultant somewhere, or social media manager or whatever, like women will start unironically going into STEM stuff and going into trades and whatever, and they will immediately get put to the front of the line. You know, and I got fired for even referencing that, or like commenting on a Foyd telling me that. Right? So, women and favored males really do have absolutely no understanding of what we go through. And it's something they will never be able to understand. They can never know how it really feels to be barred from actualizing your potential, and to experience the sickening realization that you are nothing more than a stunted, broken, unwanted husk of a human male. It is a feeling of dread that is impossibly unknowable to those who have not felt it. 100%. This is what I'm saying. Like, he has some real bangers. He has some real paragraphs that I would have, even though I resonate 100% with what he says in that case. I would find it hard for me to write that, because I would feel pathetic writing it. You know, not even that it's something pathetic to identify with, but it's just, we're so conditioned to, we have this, I guess you could call it like a false consciousness, to such an extreme extent that we even view admitting to ourselves the circumstances of our situation to be extremely difficult and humiliating, you know? And that's part of it, right? I mean, not even being able to acknowledge the circumstances as they are makes it extremely, it adds to the pain of being in this situation, right? New metal is celebrated now thanks to Zoomers because their first musical love is hip-hop. Yo, he actually talks about rap later on in this manifesto. He does talk about it. I'll get to that too. The way he writes, you could tell that this guy is like turbo online and like a giga autist. Like, I know that I would have personally enjoyed interacting with him. And it's because he's sort of this intellectually siloed off guy who probably has no friends that he interacts with, and has constructed this really complex internal belief system entirely based on his own thinking without any outside influence. It'd be very interesting to just sort of probe into, but you could tell that this guy, he's kind of like, in some ways, he's kind of a supreme gentleman. Like, there's no way that the way that he types and he talks, or like how he expresses himself, it's very poetic in a lot of ways, but it's also very much, it's not normal. It's abnormal. It's very non-neurotypical, and you know for a fact that, like, even if he, and there's pictures of him that were floating around, and he's not especially good looking, but he's not ugly either. Like, he's an okay looking guy. And you could tell that probably a lot of his problems are stemming from being non-neurotypical. But anyways, their debauched madness, I think he's talking about women and chads here. As we have seen, the direct result of social dynamics of the hypergamy state, which inevitably inculcates an attitude of haughty egoism amongst many favored males, who are spoiled for their entire lives to an obscene degree. They never have to face any real hardships at all. They've never been told no by anyone. They simply go about their lives with inordinate amounts of sensory pleasure thrown at them at every moment. Again, I already talked about this earlier in the stream. To some extent, he's right, but I think that he's really overestimating how important, like, yes, being accepted by women and desired by women is very important, but like being categorically racially excluded from your economy is also really critical. And no amount of foids being attracted to you is going to make up for being structurally excluded from the economy. Now, you could say that, well, because he's attractive, he'll have opportunities that an unattractive guy wouldn't have to circumvent this. And that's true. But that doesn't mean that it's not going to be very visible in his mind that he is discriminated against on the basis of his race in a country that his own people created. Like, I can tell you that attitude, that resentment towards unfair treatment due to DEI is actually widespread from the most attractive guys to the least attractive guys. Like, this resentment towards it. It may be more suppressed in the more attractive guys because they have other things that distract them from that, but they're still bothered by it. Like, if it comes up peripherally, they'll agree, like, that it's bullshit, right? Like, it matters a lot, is what I'm saying. And I have a feeling this guy was a NEET, or he was marginally employed to the extent that he didn't interact with these kind of people. It's one of these major factors. I think for a lot of guys, it's more important, because even for less attractive guys, in order to be attractive to a woman as a sub 7, I would say, you have to have some economic activity in your life, especially as you get older. Like, okay, maybe when you're a teenager, you can, and even maybe in your early 20s, you can get away with a little bit. But by your mid-20s and older, there's going to be expectations of some kind of economically comfortable future that women will have. And if you can't provide that to them, they're not going to be interested in you for very long. You know, even if they might be initially interested in you, that's a major factor. And I would say that that's as big of a contributor to inceldom as looks are. Like, the economic condition of men relative to women. That's a huge factor. Anyways, let's continue here. Then he quotes Mao in this one. And I was thinking of reading it out, but it's really kind of complicated. It talks about how idealism was invented by the bourgeois because of their material conditions. The social origins of idealism and materialism are found in the contradictory social structure of class. On the one hand, an oppressing class cannot but, in the pursuit of its own interests, develop and consolidate its idealist theories. On the other, oppressed class, similarly in pursuit of its own interests, can do no other than develop and consolidate materialist theories. Now, he has his own note here, the writer of the manifesto, the guy. He writes, note that the term materialism here does not refer to hedonistic consumerism, but rather, which is unfortunately what the word materialism has been redefined in. Mao correctly defines both idealism and materialism. According to idealism, the world is a synthesis of the entirety of consciousness, or the spiritual process created by our reason, or the world's reason. It regards the external material world as either completely fabricated illusion or the material external trapping of spiritual elements. Basically, he's saying it's Platonism. This is Platonic. I won't go into it, but it's like the concept of the Plato's cave, where you're seeing the shadows, and I won't go into it because that's another hour long. But then he says, materialism, on the other hand, considers the unity of the universe to derive from its materiality, and that spirit is one of the natural characteristics of matter, which emerges only when matter has developed to a certain stage. Nature, matter, and the objective world exist apart from spirit and are independent of it. Human knowledge is a reflection of the objective external world. So it is basically materialism, like it's philosophical materialism. There isn't really anything outside of our organic, atomic existence, our physical material existence, biological existence. And at that point then, you then have to ask, well, when he's appealing to these like deeply felt emotional and psychic experiences, like he goes on about his personal suffering, and he uses words like love and like we've been denied love. I'm like, well, love is not something materially present. Like, it doesn't exist. Like, what you're describing is a certain emotional state which could, in theory, be produced by provoking the right chemicals in your brain. Like, you could induce that feeling, in theory, just using a concoction of chemicals injected into your brain. Like, why are you referring to this as something that exists outside of the material world then? Like, this is one of the problems that I have with these types of thinking, is that it's highly reductionist. And you end up with, like, this is how the communists develop these insane ideas about how we can deconstruct all of our sexual norms, and that this will help create a communist ideal man by eliminating these attachments that are based on the acquisition and passing down of property, because that's what they believe marriage comes from, and families come from, is that it's a way of acquiring and maintaining property in capitalist families. Like that the bourgeois maintains its property and passes its property down through the maintenance of these family norms and these social values. It's completely like bugman materialism. And it's like, how can you have these ideas like love and the suffering because you're deprived of it? Like, you're appealing to things that exist in the spirit that you're saying are not attached to your physical form, that don't exist in the real world. But yeah, it's just a side note. It's more like a abstract philosophical thing. Let me just catch up here. Trades are more safe than STEM at this point. See, the problem is, Javier, is that there's a lot of STEM workers that could work in trades, and they're going to end up piling into the trades and then saturating those when the STEM fields get fucked. That's the major problem. That's the major problem we have to worry about. It doesn't mean they'll all be able to, but you don't need that many. Like, even if only like 10-15% of engineering degree holders get into trades and they're able to successfully transition into trades, that still is 10-15% of the market that now you have additional tradesmen competing in, right? That's going to hurt, right? Anyways, he says here, in the West, most males, this is page 69, most males now inhabit a completely different world from the one that most females do. Not only are these two worlds generally dissimilar, but they are actually not even remotely alike in practically any manner at all. What is the world of the female? What are its elements? Blissfulness, harmony, thriving, fulfillment, meaning, intimacy, connection, and love. There might be a smattering of problems, sure, but these are mostly overcome or held at bay with relative ease. What are the elements of life for the small fraction of males that are allowed to inhabit her world of light with her? Well, in addition to love, they are absolute indulgence, extroversion, triumph, wealth, arrogance, haughtiness, sensory pleasures, and revelry in them, even unto the most depraved ends of perversion. And then he talks about the life of excess men. And by the way, this is why I was saying, like, this guy's very clearly some kind of romantic, right? Yeah, you caught me. I hit my vape. I was starting to... I forgot how sensitive this microphone is. Anyways. What's this? LMAO Millennial Rick and Morty moment. What's the Millennial Rick and Morty moment? Oh, listen, Morty, I hate to break it to you, but what people call love is just a chemical reaction. Yeah. I just realized that a lot of AI speak sounds similar to how you just typed Rick and Morty. Like it hits hard, Morty, and then it slowly fades. That sounds a lot like what ChatGPT would say. But yeah, anyways, why liberal men or some conservative men are so cuck about women behavior. My mom's probably more red pill than my dad because she works around younger women. Well, a lot of men, especially if they have daughters, I think you mentioned you had a sister, right? They develop these highly protective and idealistic beliefs about young women. It's not even necessarily sexual. Like I know a lot of manosphere types will accuse boomer men of being sexually motivated by gatekeeping their daughters. But I think in a lot of times it's just sort of they can't really accept that they're adult girls now. Like they still think of them as little girls, and they project that onto young women in general. Like at least some of them do. The types that we're talking about here. Anyways, though, let's keep going with this. And he describes the world of excess men, I guess you could say. The other place comprises a world of its own, that of outer darkness, the world of the common male. What are the elements of this world? Darkness, perturbation, strife, abandonment, meaninglessness, isolation, and the absence of love. It is a blood-curdling yet monotonous sequence of catastrophe that ends only in death. No structure is here, for it is a black abyss, so expansive that nobody knows where it ends, or if it has an end. The countless inhabitants of this realm are neither alive nor dead, but exist as immiserated, shattered, decaying, and nearly inert bodies, drifting slowly in the empty blackness of their realm. It's a very, very flowery language, but I would say I agree with that. That's sort of been my general experience. This dude is basically the Canadian version of the protagonist from Falling Down. Kind of, yeah, kind of. And he says, this is where he talks about love. Love, the highest and purest of all metaphysical forces. Again, how can you be a materialist, a philosophical materialist, and talk about metaphysics? Okay, communists reject metaphysics. They believe metaphysics is nonsense. Why are you referencing metaphysical forces? But that's a side note. Anyways, is the only thing that can save them and the only thing that can give them a peace. But it is something that they can never attain as they have been cruelly cut off from it. They have been cruelly cut off not only from love, but also from any other remedial energies which are indulged in so eagerly by the ones who have found themselves within the sphere of light. He creates this division between what he sees as this sort of, it's almost like an Eden-like, like a Garden of Eden-like world that attractive men and women live in. And then there's this separate parallel world, which is like the dark world where the rest of us live in. I mean, he's not wrong, right? I would say that I think that because obviously he's drawing his beliefs about the male-female dynamics from more mainstream red pill stuff. I would say that there's truth to it in terms of the selection is much more heavily on men than on women because there's more men competing, single men competing for a smaller pool of single women, and that this creates this effect. I don't believe it's because it's just simply the women choosing, because again, there's some contradiction here, because he's talking about how these women are living this blissful existence. If this were true, like you can't have polygamous harems in blissful women. Like if there's one thing that makes women miserable, and we know this because we've seen it in records of societies that were polygamous, it's polygamy. It's dealing with extra women with one man. Like they absolutely despise that. But I don't believe that's the case. I believe that there's an excess percentage of men, probably around 30%, and that the remaining men are in relationships or able to get into relationships, and they do exist in a separate world. Like fundamentally, his description of these two worlds is accurate. There's a world where there's men and women, and they are in relationships. They exist, like the way I've thought about it, the way I've thought about it is it's kind of like being an active person that exists in an active way in the world versus somebody that is just sort of an observer throughout the world, where you are just watching everyone else going about their lives and observing them. And I think this is the experience this guy had, where he was just this observer in life that never really interacted with it. Like this world where men and women are forming relationships, where these women are seeing these men as objects of sexual desire, the same way that the men are seeing the women. Like they're sexual beings, and they're forming these relationships. They're having sex. They're and it's not. But obviously, it's not just about sex for him. Like he doesn't say sex, the highest and purest of all metaphysical forces. He says love, right? That's what he's focused on. And it does feel like these people are in the world in an active way, like they exist in the world, and you don't really exist in a concrete way until you're part of that world. And until that point, it's almost like you are not a fully real person. You know, you exist in this other dimension where you can observe everyone else living their lives, but you're outside of that. You know? So I can sympathize with that point of view. And he says, again, like he starts to get really poetic in his language, but I kind of like it. You know, again, maybe this is just me, but it's like, what has been shattered can be mended. What has been weakened? Oh no, wait, this is a little bit afterwards. She says, love, the highest good of them all, is something that they will never have. That fact in itself is a cosmic and universal agony. How indescribably sad it is that so many countless innocents have been forced to suffer in such a disgusting way. Yeah, and then near the end, he has a really good ending line. He says, to be forcibly deprived of romantic love is a terrible thing, and the one who cannot attain such love cannot actualize his authentic self. Our opponents are very powerful, and their wishes for us to ceaselessly serve them in massive numbers as unwitting, brutalized, half-dead wage slaves, with no possessions, no actualization, and no love in our lives. They have effectively murdered our girlfriends, our wives, and our children, as those realities were severed away from us before we were conceived. The girl who was supposed to be your girlfriend was taken from you a long time ago. He uses the word sodomized out of reality. I find that kind of strange, but he says nothing is going to bring her back, and nothing is going to suffice for the warmth, for the harmony, and for the love that has been viciously ripped away from you. It was ripped away from you before you even had a chance to defend yourself. See, I can sympathize a lot with how he's thinking. In that, like, I sympathize more with sort of how he's despairing. I don't really sympathize with his solutions because they start to become kind of ridiculous. Like he creates a blueprint for what is effectively like a revolutionary incel state. Let me see what else we got here. I think I'm pretty much... Oh yeah, he talks about the leftists here. He says, the leftists partially or entirely reject the validity of bourgeois economics, i.e. capitalism, but they love the degeneracy that capitalism produces. And then he says, they don't see that all of the countries where capitalism has actually been overcome, the very degeneracies that liberals delight in have also withered away, because such things can only be prevalent as a direct result of capitalism. See, I disagree with him here. I would say that it's not because of capitalism does promote this, but the reason why these things withered away is because the states that were communist states, they were no longer democratic. They became dictatorships, and then the dictatorships acted rationally in the national interest. And if you're a dictatorship, just think about Stalin when Germany invaded him. Do you think that the Russians would benefit from allowing just total degeneracy and family destruction that would destroy the sense of patriotism among Russians? No. Like, you need to have patriotism. You need to have a stable social structure. You need to have patriarchy in order to have men that will fight for your state and defend it, and allow you to be victorious over enemy states, right? So it's just the natural process of these states where they purge these elements that are... It's almost like how the body purges... Like if you get a splinter in your finger, eventually your body will force that splinter out of its own initiative, right? It's not something that you have to actively do. It'll eventually come out on its own because the body sees it as a dangerous foreign agent. It's the same with these anti-male ideologies. If you don't have a democratic system distorting how the state perceives its interests, if it's just a straight-up dictatorship, inevitably it's going to become socially conservative. It's going to become patriarchal. Inevitably that happens. But so I think he's overestimating capitalism here. On the other hand, we have the rightists who reject the validity of all social degeneracy, but fully embrace and accept the capitalism that causes it due to 100 years of ceaseless anti-communist brainwashing. So we end up in a situation where the rightist party takes power, the rightists are placated because they see that their precious capitalism is unthreatened. They still have a sense of dissatisfaction because the social degeneracies remain fully intact or mostly intact. Well, what he's talking about there is this was the alliance between social conservatives and libertarians, or liberals, that happened with the Reagan administration in the 1980s, and then it spread to the rest of the Anglosphere, including Canada, where it was this anti-communist stance and free market economics combined with vague social conservatism. And the two are just completely incompatible for reasons that I've talked about in my streams and also in my videos, right? Where the business interest, if anything, the capitalist class is always going to be on the side of social liberalism. They want to break down barriers to profit, barriers to monetization, and those the nation, the state is a perfect example. That's a barrier to labor mobility, right? You need to break down the borders of the state so that you can have as much migration of labor into the state as possible for the benefit of the business class. It's one of the really clear examples. But then, like social conservatism, like pro-family policies are economically inefficient, as I've talked about in previous streams. It makes a lot more sense to just import people, have a super hedonistic, consumeristic mainstream society, so that people just consume product and engage in their degenerate sterile sex, and then go home to their apartments and do the same thing again for 50 years and then die, as opposed to producing families. You can just import people. You can import people that are fully grown. You don't need to rely on these natural families that are extremely expensive to produce and then to educate. So he's right about this. But that was not something that was inherent. That was more like a Reagan era and later thing. But yeah, let's see what else we got here. Conversely, when the leftist party takes power, the leftists are placated because they see their beloved social degeneracy is promoted. They hold on to some dissatisfaction because capitalism remains entirely or mostly unabated. Yeah, that's exactly it. Actually, I think Javier brought up E. Michael Jones. E. Michael Jones made this really good quip about it. He's like, there's the party of sodomy and the party of usury. The Republicans are the party of usury, the Democrats are the party of sodomy, and you always get both, because neither party will oppose the other party in these endeavors. The Democrats, and of course he's talking about America, but this could be generalized to the rest of the world, really. The Democrats, the left wing, will never seriously hamper usury or the immoral economic practices. And the the Republican Party will never really stop sodomy. Like they're just, the conservatism is just like an anchor that liberals drag behind them, right? And they'll rail against each of the other side, but they don't actually intend to do anything about it, and they get to promote their own version of evil, right? So sometimes I do wonder if he's read E. Michael Jones, but I don't think so, because he wouldn't be a communist if that were the case. And then he talks. Let me see if there's anything else here. He goes into like tactics to defeat the hypergamy state, which obviously I'm not going to get into. There is one funny thing though. And this is such like a Spurg, paragraph. I just had to include it. Is I will say that there is one form of music in particular which is and always shall be absolutely unacceptable for any self-respecting insurrectionary of our cause to listen to. This so-called rap music, which is unfortunately the most popular music in the West at the time of this writing. What do I even need to say? What is there to be said that would not merely be pointing out what is obvious? Rap is literally the cultural quintessence of hypergamy state, concealed into a musical form. It is vile, repulsive, foul, and hideous in every way. What does it preach? The worship of wealth and sensory pleasures. Actually, he's right about this. I think that he goes in a little too much about the... I don't think there's anything wrong with the medium, but he is right about the... And this is it was interesting. I was watching this podcast from, what's their name? Let me see if I can find the podcast I'm thinking of here. Hold on. I think it's in my liked videos. Let's see here. Oh, maybe not. There's this podcast of this, and I'm sure you guys, if you've been on the alt-right or anything, just the British accent is really fitting. I will say that there is a form of music in particular which is and always shall be absolutely unacceptable for any self-respecting insurrectionary of our cause to listen to. See, I'm actually not very good at the British accent, because I can't really do the rhotic R, as they say, or whatever the term is. Actually, hang on. I can't switch my account on, because I'm streaming on my computer, but I can just check it on my phone, actually. So I'm going to see right now. Let's see. Because I know I have it saved on one of my private account, I'm pretty sure. Let's see. Let's see if I can find it here. Here we are, Based Camp. Okay, so it's Based Camp with Simone and... Let's see here. Based Camp with Simone and Malcolm. I mean, these guys, I have issues with their belief system or whatever. But they are sort of, they're these, they're kind of like neoliberal turned conservative in some ways, but from a rationalist, materialist point of view. They're like, we need to produce more children and be socially conservative because it's the most biologically optimal thing to do as Darwinian creatures. Like, that's their psychology. But hang on, where was I going with this? Hang on. Because I wanted to look up the Based Camp for... let me see if I can... Was it about AI? No. I think it had to do with the culture war, right? Let me see here. This is my problem, is that this is why I can't read comments while I'm talking, because I will completely lose track of whatever I was talking about. It'll come back to me, but it was related to one of their podcasts. They had talked about something in one of their podcasts related to... Oh, yes. So they were talking about how Black Americans, they're almost identical culturally. And I think also Thomas Sowell talked about this. Black Americans are almost identical culturally with the Scotch-Irish of the American South, which is not surprising because that's who they live side by side with, except in one area where, because they shared the tendency towards hostility to authority and hostility to hierarchy, and also to this tendency to be kind of loud and obnoxious. But one of the areas where they differed most sharply with the white Protestant Southerners, the Scotch-Irish Southerners, is that the white Southerners have always had this disgust towards excessive displays of wealth, whereas with blacks in the United States, they never had that. There's always been this culture of like really showing off your wealth and your status as something that's not shameful in any way. That's like extremely highly valued among blacks. That's one of the areas where they differ from the Scotch-Irish. And yeah, unfortunately, rap is kind of designed for that. It's like whiskey to the natives, where like it really amplifies some of the worst characteristics. Like not the medium itself, of course, but just the like what they rap about. He's right about this, even though he does it in a very spurgy way. He says, Tofu says there's a deeply puritanical vibe to his writing. Yes, exactly. This is the kind of, look, this guy's psychology, this is the kind of Anglo-Saxon that the British Empire was built off of. Is it this kind of like stuffy, elaborate, idealistic in many ways, but also very prudish and very concrete and materialistic in his way, in his psychology and his ways of thinking. Like he's very much not prone to, like he even though he you could tell psychologically he's an idealist in many ways. He still cannot escape the way that Anglos are really, it's really drilled into you psychologically. You cannot be taken seriously unless you have some empirical grounding to your grievance of some kind, or your belief, or your strongly held passionate view of something. You cannot, unless there's some empirical material reason for holding this view, you cannot, it's unacceptable to express it. And it really comes through. Like this is something I can actually relate a lot to this, because I think in a lot of the same ways. Like I have that same Anglo mental configuration. It can be very good for certain things. It's really good if you're a scientist, and also a social scientist. This is why I think the Americans and the English were some of the best social scientists, empirically speaking. I mean, producing actually good sociology and psychology research that was empirically grounded, because of this really intense material, really intense empiricism. But at the same time, it makes it so that it's very difficult to express yourself. As I was reading, it comes out in a lot of areas. This guy is actually deeply idealistic, talks a lot about love. He talks a lot about the agony of missing this in his life, and how there's the world of light where this exists, and then the world of darkness that he is in, and people that identify with him, which would include us. Well, people that he identifies as being in the same category as him, which would be all Inkies, right? But he can't escape his psychology. He spends most of his time trying to build a structural critique and structural argument for his emotional experience. That's what I'm looking for. That's the word I'm looking for. He feels the need to construct this whole ideology in order to express himself emotionally. It's very Anglo. But he starts to... Some of this gets really funny because it starts to get ridiculous. He starts to talk about if he was in charge, what his solutions would be. And he says here, the essential political conditions of a society in which capitalism/liberalism and thereby hypergamy itself are not part of the established order of things have mostly been laid out by Marx and Engels in works like the Communist Manifesto. The most important of these conditions are the full abolition of private property without compensation and subsequent nationalization of this property, centralization of credit in the hands of the state with the establishment of a central bank and a planned economy, the establishment of state control over the means of transport and communication. This is just straight up communist. Like, this is actually, I think this is a direct quote out of the Communist Manifesto, pretty sure. And he says, by establishing the first of these, we will deprive the bourgeois class of its ability to enslave us and hoard our women. Without private property, they simply can do none of the things which they presently do that result in our biological deprivation. No more will they be able to hire women in huge numbers. No more will they be able to market consumerism, hedonism, cosmopolitanism, greed, lechery, and other filth to women or anyone else. And no more will they be able to enslave common males through a combination of systemically enforced wage labor, blah blah. I mean, he just writes way too much. Like, he's got to be more concise. Drugs and being a wage slave. That's what he's saying. To make monogamy prevalent, we need to get women out of the workplace and stop her from having her own income. Yeah, well, I mean, he's right about that. And he says his solution is that we need to introduce robots to do female work. And at that point, then, I guess because he's assuming that he's already in control of the government. I guess if you're already in control, you could do that. But I'm thinking, like, if you're not in control, how would you even get to that point? Like, I guarantee you the last group that is going to suffer from automation of their jobs is going to be women. And it's not because women do work that is the least likely to be automated. It's because the state will intervene to either prevent automation in women's jobs, or they will create jobs for women to allow them to exist independently of men, because they're part of the political coalition. They're going to be taken care of, right? Savvy Guy mentioned government needs to give us free checks for escorts to cope with life. Well, didn't they used to do that in the Netherlands? I'm pretty sure they did. I don't know if they still do. I know that there was a lot of whinging about it. I don't really see... Like, I can understand arguments against prostitution. Like, I can understand the ethical arguments, whatever. But, I mean, of all the groups that are... Like, I would consider that, like, giving... Because the Netherlands didn't just give incels credit to use the escorts or whatever. It was, like, people with severe disabilities. We're talking, like, cerebral palsy and stuff. To me, that seems like it's... Like, I mean, if you can find women willing to do that, I just don't see it as that big of a... I don't really see the moral dilemma in the same way. I guess you could make the... I'm not saying I even agree with it, but I'm saying you could make the argument that able-bodied men pursuing sex workers is in some way immoral, or in some way is exploiting women. Like, you could make that argument. I don't see how you could make it if we're talking about people that are literally disabled to the point where there's no way they could get any woman. Like, it's just impossible. Like, at that point, then, you know, it almost seems like an act of charity, really, on the woman's part. You know, that he at least is not going to... He's at least going to have that to some extent in his life, right? Or he'll be able to at least experience it, you know? It's kind of like when you hear... Like, you'll hear stories of, say, a 12-year-old boy, and... he's dying of some rare cancer, and he's guaranteed to be terminal, and his wish is that he wants to lose his virginity. And I remember that there was this debate on one of these social media platforms, and of course all the feminists were saying, no, this is horrible, this is evil. But I remember thinking, like, I don't think any woman that would be willing to accommodate this kid, even though, okay, technically it's obviously it's against the law for obvious reasons. But I'm just saying, ethically speaking, it's not the same as if this was like a healthy kid, you know. And I found it very strange that women were so militant about that, especially if it's like his dying wish. I mean, what are you going to do? Are you going to say, sorry, kid, you're going to die a virgin, you're never going to experience physical intimacy, you're going to leave this earth without ever experiencing that, even though you're physically capable of it, because we decided that it's not moral. Like, it's, I don't know. It was an interesting debate to read. I mean, I'm glad that I'm not the one in charge deciding that ethically, because that would be a hard one. That would be a real hard one. Obviously, in terms of legal statutes, I am obviously opposed to this across the board. My politics, my actual political views, I was like, obviously I'm just musing right now. My real political views are whatever is acceptable by Discord terms of service. So, and this would include, I believe, the age of consent is 18. We should have it at 18. So, I'm just saying that. Anyways, so one of the funny things that I found, I really found hilarious was he says the ubiquity of cars in society has actually been one of the most significant factors that has allowed favored males and women to so frequently and excessively copulate with each other. And without his car, the favored male would no longer be able to access gigantic numbers of women with ease, while the female without her car will no longer be able to drive across town or across her province or out of her country in order to meet with the favored male, thus abandoning the male of her area who ought to be her husband. So it's like we're gonna ban cars so that Becky and Chad are forced to date their looks match within 10 kilometers or something. There's something really funny about that. Just unfortunate. Again, it's like this guy's he's clearly intelligent, and he's clearly like he thinks seriously about this stuff, and he was passionately motivated by it, but because he was socially isolated, he ended up where he ended up, right? Instead of doing something much more productive, you know. He brought up geomaxing in one of his very Saudi Arabia coded, alhamdulillah. He did bring up geomaxing actually in one of his sections of the writing. I don't have it, like I didn't copy paste it because it was just like 2 lines or whatever, but he was like, it was one of the he was like one of the copers basically, and the line was to him, somebody saying this to him, why don't you travel somewhere like Southeast Asia? And his reply was, basically, to paraphrase, because he's super overly verbose, he's like, I may or may not be attracted to the women from these countries, on the one hand, and then on the other, I would be depriving another man of his rightful wife or potential wife. I can sympathize with the second part because I get it, but the first part, it's like, come on, man, beggars can't be choosers. Like, are you telling me that you developed this 100-page I don't even want to call it the M word now. Like, it's like an essay. It's like it's not even an essay. It's like a book. It's like a 100-page book on this like really complex structural ideology just because you couldn't get access to white foids. Is that really what it comes down to? Like, rice foids aren't good enough. That's why you came up with this how to take down the hypergamy state. Come on, man. And he also says something else that's prescient. He says, make no mistake, though, the vast majority of women are not going to put up any significant resistance. Their lives are not political. They don't really take such things very seriously. Why should they, after all? They can have sex, they can have friends, they can have parties. There isn't really any reason for most of them to be political on a devoted level in today's world. Sure, they might verbally express their political ideas at times when it's convenient or safe to do so, but on the whole, the majority of them don't seem to be organisms that are naturally capable of combat. Like, that's what he says, basically. At least not direct physical combat, the kind that males are adapted to. Well, I said this. Like, I made a video on it. It's called Women in the Political. This is one of these things where I'm like, did this guy watch anything that I made? I don't think he did. Well, actually, maybe he did. I mean, he didn't cite me if he did, which is probably a good thing, because I would actually be in up Shit's Creek if he cited me. So, but this is something I talked about. To get their way, women largely rely on various manipulation tactics that we biologically conscious males are developing an immunity to. We are outgrowing the liberal philosophical delusions that uphold the hypergamy state's legitimacy. We know that female biological imperative is. We know how disastrous the consequences are. Allowing them to unrestrainedly fill that biological imperative. See, that again, what makes me think that he hasn't actually seen anything of me, and he's just arriving at similar conclusions because, well, I'm going to say his logic is good because that also complements me, in this area at least, is because he keeps referring to this sort of red pill stuff of the biological imperative, the dual mating strategy. Like, this stuff is not empirical. It's not been reproduced empirically. Like where you see women screwing around on their husbands, etc., is or like men in general, is like in the bottom classes. You don't see it pretty much anywhere outside of the bottom quarter. And I'm talking historically. Like we can compare Y DNA with surnames and see if there's a change in the Y DNA at some point in the past. And there's been studies done on this. It's like less than 0.1% or something. Look, I'm not defending women, right? I'm trying to steel man as much as possible. That's really what's critical with me. I would only date Japanese, the rest are bug people. Maybe. I mean, I'm not a big fan of ricefoids, to be honest with you. Not even that I find them unattractive. It's more so that the culture that they have is just something that doesn't appeal to me. But that might just be a personal preference, right? Like, I find that it's very socially isolated culture. That's exactly the sort of thing I'd be escaping from. You know, and this is also why I say, for anyone that's seriously going to Geomax, you do not want to do it because you want to get a foid, right? You would be wanting to change your entire lifestyle. You'd want to be part of a completely different culture. And cultures like in East Asia, if you're a European or even like a non-Asian, like if you're black or if you're Middle Eastern or whatever, it's going to be so different from what you're used to that I just don't think it would be as good of a fit. Like the only thing, if I were in Southeast Asia, if I were in Thailand, I think the only thing that would be holding me there would be if I was romantically involved with a foid there. That'd be the only thing holding me there, because I have no other, like, there's no other way I could make a tie to the culture because it's completely alien. Like, I'm a completely alien race, you know? Whereas at least in Latin America, like, there are whites in Latin America, there are other races too. There are whites, blacks, indigenous, even some Asians, you know? So it's not like you're a complete outsider, you know? Like, there are people that look like me walking around places like Florianopolis or in Montevideo, places like that, you know? So it's not like I would be completely alien. I could actually become part of that in a way that I couldn't in Asia. But that's just my personal preference. One thing that Raymond Abraham said that was so true is some perspective, as bad as things are, they are very peaceful compared to the 99% of history. Well, Canadian 8, kind of like that. That's true to some extent. But then there's also, if you're the survivor... Well, I mean, it's like a Thanos snap, right? But if you're the survivor in the earlier time periods in the world where there was lots of war, there was lots of ways to die, if you did survive as a man, you would have the pick of the litter when it came to women, or not necessarily a pick of the litter, because you also had to worry about your class and stuff, right? But there'd be no way that you would be denied a woman, because there would be more women that survive than men, just in war in general, and also in terms of health outcomes, because women have better immune systems than men, and so there would always be an excess of women. As a matter of fact, spinsterism was far more common than bachelorhood. You know, one of the reasons why we developed an aversion to homosexuality in men but not women is because it was just like, it was quite common for a woman to become a spinster just out of bad luck. Whereas for a man, if you were a bachelor into your 30s or older, you were seen as very suspicious. Like, why are you not married yet? You know, it was actually seen as something like, why, you know, you should be very easily married. Yeah. Why be mindful of your class? Well, in the sense that like if you were born as a peasant in medieval Europe, you'd still probably have kind of a shitty existence, right? Even if you survived, because the quality of life was not great for obvious reasons. But other than that, if we're just talking about male-female relations, there was no issues with not having a woman in those times. There was pretty much an excess of women in all age groups. There's a whole expat community in Thailand. You'll be okay. Yeah, but they're not connected to the country. Like it's like a foreign colony. It's like Brampton in Canada. In that sense, yes, but you're still existing as a separate layer on top of this completely alien culture. Like there's no real connection between this foreigner colony and the actual real Thailand, right? I really liked Portugal. It was very social. Yeah, that's where they get it from in Latin America. White Latina women are like, I'm assuming you mean are like white women in the West. Yeah, I'm not surprised. Why wouldn't they be, right? The only real issue with Latin America is that the economic conditions constrain how libtarded they can get, right? So you can't have adult daycare jobs for women if the money is not there to provide and support them. And you also can't have too much feminism if you don't have an omnipresent security state, police state, that can immediately respond to any calls for help, like within 2 minutes, right? Like in a lot of these countries, women, unless you're very rich and you're in a gated community, most of these countries, women have to rely on men just being there to keep them safe, from criminal activity or whatever, being robbed or anything like that, because the police presence just isn't there. They just don't have. They're nowhere near as omnipresent. Latin Europe, with the exception of France, is more social than Germanic and Baltic Europe. 100%. 100%. Though the problem is Spain and Portugal have become turbo libtarded. Really, really libtarded. Which is sort of, to me, it's like a signal that they're really part of the West. They're not like a North African colony. Okay, they're really part of the West, and you can tell because they're turbo libtarded. They're as bad as the UK. They're as bad as Scandinavia in a lot of ways. I've got her girlfriend now. She's Iranian. Forget trying to date Canadian women. They're cooked. Well, that's good to hear. Actually, I never in person dated an Iranian, but I have interacted with them online, and I would say they're among the, like, I would say Middle Eastern women in general are pretty good. I don't know if they still are. They were 10 years ago. Iranians in particular were pretty sophisticated, intelligent women. And it's funny to say because we're used to associating intelligence and classiness in women with being stuck-up bitches, but in a lot of these Middle Eastern cultures, like women that are highly educated and intelligent, they're also respectful of men, or at least they were. Again, it could have changed in the last 10 years since I regularly interacted with Middle Eastern women, but that was generally my experience. They tended to be very respectful, and they tended to be quite, actually, another thing that really shocked me about them, because I interacted with women from the Arabian Peninsula and from Iran, and what struck me as really surprising was that they were actually very rational. Like they were much more rational in terms of how they thought than European women and American Canadian women. Like where they're very heavily influenced by emotions, whereas like you could sit down with these women and you could have an honest conversation about like this is the situation as it is. We can't, like, don't let your feelings interfere. This is the reality of the situation. Whereas with like Anglo women, they get like if reality doesn't conform to how they feel about a situation, they just twist reality in their own minds, And I guess it's because these countries, women can't really afford to do that. You know, like you can exist outside of reality in a Western country because there's a lot of resources that are designed around allowing you to do that. Like the government allows you to do that. In a lot of these Middle Eastern countries, they're not, right? Like they have very clear and sharply defined limits on their lives, on what they can and cannot do. And as a result, they develop a more rational intelligence, in my experience. This could be entirely off base. Like this could be just selection bias. It's not like I've interacted with a huge segment. Like I'm talking about like 3 women that I interacted with. But that was generally my impression. Yeah, but Muslim women force you to convert, so you become a Muslim cuck. Alhamdulillah, you have to dick clip max. That's something that was a major barrier for me. Yeah. Do you think they're compensating for being swarthy? I think so. Well, I don't think it's really being swarthy. I think Spain and Portugal, it's more so that they see themselves as being kind of backwards compared to the big major European countries like France, England, Germany. And so they're always feeling like they have to catch up, or they have to it's kind of like how Canada is with the US, where you have to they have to prove to themselves that they're just as sophisticated libtards as the leading European countries are. Yeah, it also is filled with immigrants too. Yeah, Muslims everywhere. That's true. Drug cartel drives the male and female ratio down. That is true, actually. This is something I did with a Brazilian guy. We looked at different cities in Brazil, like Salvador, João Pessoa. There's another one, Fortaleza, and then there's some of the cities in the south, Florianopolis, Sao Paulo. We looked at those cities, and we looked at the male-female ratio. And the southern cities, they had more men. Well, I mean, the ratios were actually pretty good in general. But in the northern cities, northeastern cities, there was, in pretty much every age bracket above adulthood, like 18 plus, there were more women than men. It wasn't, because you know how if you look at typical population pyramids, you don't see women start to outnumber men until like their 40s or like their mid 30s. In some of these cities like Salvador, you were looking at like 18 to 25 girls outnumber, or men outnumber, or women outnumber men, excuse me. And same in the next bracket upwards, 26 to 35. Women outnumber men. And they outnumber them in all the age brackets. And we theorized it's because of the endemic gang violence in these places, and also that there's a lot of male migration out of these cities for employment reasons, right? Because it's still sort of a traditionalist country in some ways, where, like, if you're dating a woman, you're always going to be expected to foot the bill. Like it's sort of like 1980s US in that way, where it's not like liberal as in like trad wives or whatever, but it's like if you're a man and you're in a relationship with a woman, you're going to be spending the money. Like, she's not really going to buy you things, right? You're going to be buying her things, and that's just how it is. So for a lot of these guys, I think they go for the cities in the south to try and find work, and then they'll save up money, and then they'll go back to their home city to try and, settle down with a woman. Yeah, so it is actually a thing. It's kind of based. This is how we concluded that endemic crime is actually based in Red Pill, and you should actually support violent crime in your cities because it reduces the excess male population. It's giga-based. Anyways, though, guys, I think I'm going to head to get some dinner now because it's getting pretty late. This actually didn't take me as long as I thought. I thought I might go over 3 hours with this this thing because I was just taking. There's like 13 pages worth of, 11 pages worth of notes here. But we managed to get through them. So now you guys, because I was getting bothered by people to do this, it was over 100 pages that I read through. And we did like a deep dive analysis on this guy. Hopefully I don't get any knocks at the door, but we will see. Obviously, we don't advocate or support any of his actions. This is more like an intellectual exercise. Obviously, my preference is like we can't solve anything structurally. The only way to deal with this is to figure out a personal solution for yourself. Maybe there'll be like a political solution at some point, but highly unlikely. And it's just overall a tragedy. Again, like this guy, he's clearly kind of an autist. He's very puritanical, which I can in some ways sympathize with because I'm a little bit like that too. I think it's an Anglo thing. But just being totally socially isolated, he developed this megalomaniacal belief about his own ideas because he never had any feedback. It was kind of, it's like I mentioned it when I previously talked about him. It's where if you're not reflecting off of other people, if you don't get the feedback from other people about who you are, like psychologically how you are, and your ideas, your beliefs, like your value, you're going to develop a distorted sense of your value, distorted in a negative way and distorted in a positive way. And I think this happened in both cases here. Obviously, there's some things that we can sympathize a lot with, especially how he talks about how, he's really in despair. He's clearly he really wanted love in his life. And on the other hand, he developed this belief. I skipped a huge segment of it, for obvious reasons. I'm not talking about it. Where he talks about how do we acquire our targets for revolutionary violence, and again, he talks about his revolutionary incel state or incel communist state or something along those lines, like really crazy shit. And maybe he would have been disabused of this if he talked to people that were outside of his total bubble of isolation, but he didn't. And so it ended up with very clearly a very intelligent guy ending his life and then pointlessly taking the life of a police officer, not really achieving anything. Like he clearly... one thing I will say is that this reminds me of This reminds me of when I was talking about how as AI and automation and immigration, economic immigration, they push out, they increase competition for employment and they start pushing out guys that are not just like social, like English graduates or whatever, or psychology graduates that wanted some lower middle management, but are pushing out really genuinely intelligent, systemic thinkers, like STEM-oriented thinkers. That when you push these men in particular out of society, you're starting to create a radicalized faction who will take their alienation from their goals and dreams in life, and they will turn that into a structured, systemic worldview, and then they'll use that to enact actions that obviously result in the outcomes that we have here. Or, like, imagine if this guy, if he wasn't a Spurg, like he could have created... maybe he could have created a network of people that could have done something far more dangerous, right? It's like this is what you get when you have an economic system that is structurally alienating an entire segment of young men from being able to even get their foot in the door. And then from there, in addition to the social issues with getting a woman, they're economically cut off at the knees. Where even if they had the looks to qualify, they still don't have the means to be a viable mate for most women, right? Well, Mercer, what do you do if you are alone, whether you don't know anyone or you can't contact them due to technology being sucky? Well, I mean, look, this guy, he obviously knows all the stuff that we talk about. He could have interacted with any of us. Like, he could have interacted with, who knows? Like, it's not like this is a super secret dark corner of the internet, right? I'm streaming on YouTube, right? So it's just a shame. Like, in that sense, like, I was accused of being a de-radicalizer on the Thomas White stream by a guy. I think his name was Critters. And I was like, yeah, I am in a lot of ways, because I don't think that these solutions achieve anything. You just end up taking your own life in a pointless way, and nothing changes. Like, nobody's talking about this guy other than me, right? He hasn't affected, and it's funny. It's actually, let me pull this up. In the beginning of his here we are, Hatfield. He talks about how I do not intend to cause unrest within non-Western nations by the distribution of this text therein, but I hope that this work will help elucidate the true nature of the West. And I directly condone and encourage the publication of this text in Russian, Arabic, Farsi, Hindi, Spanish, Portuguese, and Mandarin Chinese. Like this is clearly delusional, right? This is delusional levels of grandeur. And it's just such a shame that it ended in this pointless outcome, you know? But yeah, there's not much else I can add to it. You know, I can tell you one thing, another thing, actually. I can add one more thing. It's clear that this guy, he's very poetic, very verbose, and he's clearly a sensitive guy, or he was, but he's also very obviously not somebody who has much experience socializing normally, just because of the way he writes. Like, he doesn't realize how cringe some of these things come off as. It is like ER tier cringe in some of the, like, Supreme Gentleman cringe in some areas. In a previous era, when there was, like, let's say that he was born in small town Ontario, in like a town of a couple tens of thousands, and there was no internet. Let's say it's like the 70s or whatever. Even though he probably is neurodivergent in Spurgy in some ways, he would have still, like, he would have been forced into interactions with people enough times that he would eventually have acquired, like, social awareness just through experience, and he would have had a normal existence. Like, there are guys that would have been this guy who are currently, and if they were born today or born 20 years ago, that were born 50 years ago, 60 years ago, who are grandfathers, or who have, like, adult children and are living in their second houses and have wives that they've been married to for 20 years. You know, like, it really is. Like, it's not just subhumans or whatever, like intellectual subhumans that are getting caught up in this stuff now. It's actually very seriously intelligent people. It's just really sad. Anyways, I'll stop bloviating because it's 5 o'clock where I am now. It's 3 hours, so we'll call it. Thank you guys for all coming on. Hopefully, I don't get any trouble from YouTube. Maybe somebody can archive my stream, just in case, but I'm too lazy to. You know, I'm too Latin oriented. My Latin ancestry, Latinx ancestry, is making me too lazy. But anyways, I appreciate you guys showing up. I'll talk to you next week.